Chapter 1687.
My lord, someone's coming.
The leader of the security team tensed up and ordered the soldiers to be on standby. Just as they finished packing Xueqi and the others up, they noticed a group of people rushing towards them. The leader of the security team was worried that it was Xueqi's reinforcements. They didn't have many men on their side. If they really fought, they would easily be at a disadvantage. However, Zhang Pengji wasn't worried, because this group of people was none other than the pursuing troops that Xueqi and the others had shaken off not long ago. Fu Wang had just met up with them. When Fu Wang heard that General Xueqi had lost Xueqi, he was furious. He wanted nothing more than to capture them and beat them up to vent his anger. It was infuriating to lose such an important, fat fish. Fortunately, the enemy had fled in such a hurry that there was no time to erase any clues. They could follow the traces all the way. Halfway through the chase, the vanguard discovered that someone was blocking the road ahead. He immediately reported to Fu Wang, "General Fu, there are people ahead, but it doesn't seem like an ambush." When Fu Wang heard this, he raised his hand to tighten the reins. He sighed, and the well-trained warhorse quickly came to a halt. "Doesn't seem like an ambush? Go and ask them which battalion they are from." There were tens of millions of people participating in the battle. Although the troops of the various battalions were in contact, the battlefield was chaotic and news traveled slowly. Fu Wang couldn't know every place and every person's movements. If the people ahead were not in Xueqi, then they were other troops in the army. It was late at night, and it wasn't convenient for them to use battle flags to distinguish between friend and foe. It was better to understand the situation before deciding on their next move. Perhaps Xueqi had also discovered Xueqi's deserter and had specially sent people to capture him. When the vanguard received Fu Wang's order, he rode forward and asked loudly, "I am General Fu Wang's subordinate. Who are you waiting for?" When the leader of the security team heard this, his tense nerves relaxed, and a hint of joy appeared on his face. "My lord, so it's General Fu Wang's men." Zhang Pengji didn't smile. Instead, she revealed a trace of embarrassment. She seemed to have accidentally stolen Fu Wang's victory, causing the credit to fly away from his hands. "Go and tell him that I'm here."
"Yes, my lord."
The leader of the security team hadn't realized that he had stolen the victory. "General Fu Wang is here. Hurry and pay your respects." The leader of the security team was in charge of Zhang Pengji's security. Naturally, he would interact with Fu Wang. Both of them were familiar with each other's voices. Hearing this voice, Fu Wang knew that the person in front of him was his lord. Half of his worried heart was relieved. The other half was naturally in Xueqi, whose whereabouts were unknown. If the lord knew that he had lost track of the enemy's leader, not to mention a reward, it would be good enough if he didn't suffer. Fu Wang braced himself and led his men forward. He dismounted from his horse when he was still 2 to 3 feet away from Zhang Pengji and walked forward. Both sides lit up their torches. With the light dispelling the darkness, they could finally see each other clearly. "General Fu Wang greets the lord." Fu Wang put away his weapon and bowed. He was a little nervous. Zhang Pengji raised her hand to help him up. Her lips curled into an awkward but polite smile. "No need to be so polite, Zhang Tu. Are you here for Xueqi?" Fu Wang was stunned. He didn't know how his lord knew, but he quickly understood Zhang Pengji's meaning from her expression. "Master, what you did was too unethical." Fu Wang felt wronged. He still wanted to say it out loud. Zhang Pengji coughed softly and said, "The fire in the granary rose to the sky. I was worried, so I brought some people over to take a look, but I met them halfway." The captain of the security team listened silently and silently refuted in his heart. How could it be a spur-of-the-moment thing? They had clearly come prepared, and they had specifically come to stop Xueqi. Fu Wang could not say anything bad about his lord. If she brought up the matter of him losing Xueqi, he would not be able to get away with it. Thus, the pitiful Fu Wang could only silently accept the fact that his lord had snatched his kill. He could only hold back his tears of blood. He couldn't vent his anger on his master, but he could vent it on Xueqi. If it wasn't for the fact that this old fellow was so good at running, Fu Wang would have caught him long ago. Would it have been his lord's turn to snatch his head? "My lord, where's Xueqi?" Zhang Pengji pointed her thumb behind her and pouted. "He's lying there half dead. I'll take care of him when we get back." Fu Wang said, "Isn't Xueqi willing to submit?" If he submitted, Fu Wang would probably be so depressed that he would vomit blood. He did not want to see Xueqi continue to jump around. Jiang Pengji made sarcastic remarks. Her mouth was as poisonous as ever. Him? He won't turn back even if he hits a brick wall. He's very arrogant. Fu Wang could tell that his lord did not like Xueqi either. Unless Xueqi shamelessly stuck to her, she would not ask him to surrender. This place is too close to the front lines. To avoid accidental injuries, please allow me to send someone to escort you back to the camp. Jiang Pengji did not reject Fu Wang's suggestion. Anyway, Xueqi had already been captured. She was not interested in the other small fries. Okay, let's go back to the camp. Xueqi had been captured. It was a good opportunity to destroy the enemy's nest in one go. She did not want to miss such a good opportunity. Jiang Pengji captured Xueqi along with a few key personnel. Her words stirred up 1,000 ripples. Yang Si was so shocked that he almost jumped out of his bed. Wait, who did you say you caught? Yang Si was stunned. Was he dreaming and hadn't woken up yet? The person had no choice but to repeat himself. The enemy's leader, Xueqi, has been captured. My lord is waiting in the main tent for the military counselor to go over and discuss it. Yang Si wiped his face hard. All his drowsiness had disappeared. Xueqi had been captured. This was too exciting. He had the feeling that he had drunk too much and that everything was over when he woke up from his drunken stupor. Feng Zhan and the others had similar thoughts. Almost all of them were dumbfounded. They quickly changed their clothes and hurriedly rushed to the main tent. When Wei Ci heard the news, he was still awake. Not only was he not shocked, but he had a feeling that it had finally come. Please wait for a moment. Rong Ci, tidy up your attire so that you won't be disrespectful in front of others. He washed up and tidied up unhurriedly. His calm eyes carried a vague sense of relief. Ever since he had been reborn, he had known that this day would come sooner or later. When Xueqi had been defeated and killed, Wei Ci had still been imprisoned. When he saw the light of day again, his old master's corpse had long been speckled and cold. Considering that he had been his lord's subject in his previous life, he should go and see him one last time. Because the tent was located relatively close to the main tent, it was not too late for Wei Ci to wash up and head over. Half of the people in the tent had yet to arrive. After a quarter of an hour, the people arrived one after another. Fu Wang and Xie Zhe, the two heroes who had rendered meritorious service, opened the tent and sat in their seats, their bodies covered in blood. As soon as the two of them sat down, someone bowed to them and congratulated them. They had achieved a great victory in this battle. Military merits would not be able to escape. Xie Zhe turned his head and chatted happily with Li Yun. He looked disheveled, but his eyes were bright. People were in high spirits when faced with happy events. Only Fu Wang smiled bitterly to himself. He had been greatly wronged today. As he was thinking, his lord walked out from behind the screen and sat upright. Everyone could not help but straighten their backs. The meeting began. Those who were distracted, those who were miserly, those who were eating snacks, and those who were laughing and joking all became serious. Chapter 1688. What did they have to say? Of course they wanted Xueqi to die as soon as possible. The food was already heated. Could there be other changes? The 5 million salted fishes complained about the plot as they ate their melons. They'd finally had a good time after holding back for so long. If Xueqi didn't die, wouldn't it be the same as eating back the shit they'd painstakingly excreted? If that was the case, there would probably be another batch of salted fishes who'd turn from fans to haters. Carefree hee. I hope Xueqi dies as soon as possible. Tongtong's girl. There are so many people from all walks of life in the streaming room, but I don't like Xueqi. Let him die. Xingyue Tianyun. Streamer, don't forget what Xueqi did when he conquered the southern barbarians. Even if the southern barbarians deserve to die, Xueqi's methods were too despicable. If you keep this guy around, he'll bite you when you let your guard down sooner or later. Xiao Wang Yang. Like. Xueqi is a ticking time bomb. He can't compare to Huang Song and Yang Tao. If Xueqi can live even after surrendering, then I'll feel wronged for Su Bei and Su Fei. They're much more likable than Xueqi. Even though the Su brothers committed suicide after their defeat and didn't die directly at Jiang Pengji's hands, they were still better off than Xueqi. If someone like Xueqi could live, The two brothers would be filled with regret if they found out. The salted fishes had a unified opinion. The streamer could go wild, but Xueqi had to die. Jiang Pengji didn't give any explanation to the salted fishes' discussions. Instead, she paid close attention to the reactions of the civil and military officials. Yang Tao was a straightforward person. He was about to speak when his friend secretly pulled on his sleeve. He was about to stand up.
What's wrong, Xiaoyang?
Yang Tao asked his friend with his eyes, but the other gave him a shut-up look. Anyone can speak up about this matter, except for you. Don't interfere. Just be a listener.
Yan Lin had been woken up in the middle of the night for a meeting, but his mind was as clear as ever.
He could see the situation clearly.
Why?
Taking advantage of the distance, Yang Tao lowered his voice and talked to his friend. He had to get to the bottom of it. Yan Lin said confidently, "The Duke of Lanting has no intention of letting Xueqi live. It's impossible to recruit him. It's not the right time for you to go up there and say anything." Yang Tao was also a vassal who had surrendered.
Even if he had no intention of stirring up trouble now, a superior would always be on his guard.
If Jiang Pengji managed to get them to surrender every time she fought, she would definitely treat the feudal vassals well in order to show her benevolence in the future when the world was settled. Not only did he have to be treated extremely well, but he also had to be given a certain title, such as a king with a different surname. It would be fine if they kept to themselves, but as time went on, this group of people would secretly join forces to cause trouble. Jiang Pengji was not stupid. Why would she leave so many hidden dangers for herself? Huang Song had been summoned to surrender, and he had signed an oath of alliance to restrain him. Yang Tao had been summoned to surrender, and he had been given an important position as an exception. Then what should he do with Xueqi, who had been summoned to surrender?
This was one of the reasons.
The other reason was that Jiang Pengji had been at war for the past few years. She had lost a lot of manpower and resources in order to conquer Nanxing. Even if it was for the sake of the soldiers who had died in the war, Jiang Pengji could not simply summon another feudal lord to surrender. According to Yan Lin's analysis, Jiang Pengji wanted to kill Xueqi no matter how he looked at it. Yang Tao was confused. If that's the case, then what's the point of asking? Digging someone out of his bed in the middle of the night just to ask a fill-in-the-blank question with a fixed answer. That was insane. When Yang Tao asked the question, he vaguely felt someone's gaze on him. He looked up and saw that no one was paying attention to him. Yan Lin said, "It's a routine question. It's true that she wants to kill Xueqi, but to show that she's not an arbitrary person, she should at least ask." Yang Tao was so shocked that his mouth opened slightly. After a while, he managed to choke out a sentence. It's a pity that I'm only halfway through my dream." Yan Lin was speechless. Because Xueqi was more valuable dead than alive, a few important ministers secretly wanted Xueqi dead. Of course, not all of Jiang Pengji's subordinates were smart. There were always different opinions. From a short-term perspective, they all agreed that Xueqi should not be killed and that they should try to recruit him again. Given that their lord was a little fierce, they were very tactful when they made their suggestions, afraid that they would step on a mine. Jiang Pengji did not comment on this suggestion. She just turned her gaze to the others. "Besides that, do you have any other opinions?" Her gaze swept across Feng Zhan and the others one by one. Yang Si nodded his head, his eyelids drooping. His upper and lower eyelids bumped into each other. Feng Zhan covered half of his face with a fan. It looked normal, but according to the changes in his facial muscles, he was most likely yawning. Li Yun, Xie Zhe, Qi Kuang, and the others looked thoughtful. Unfortunately, they hesitated and did not dare to speak. Wei Xi, Jiang Pengji gave Wei Xi a look. The latter looked slightly awkward, but in the end, he took the initiative to leave the table. "My lord, I don't agree with the judgment of the others." Since the lord had spoken, Wei Xi naturally had to help her and smooth out the show. "What do you mean? And Xueqi is only a captive. My lord has personally asked for him to surrender once. How can you ask for him 3 or 4 times?
Asking for him once was already giving him face.
Don't be so shameless." Wei Xi continued, "Secondly, this person's temperament is treacherous. He acts ruthlessly and ruthlessly. He will do anything to achieve his goals. This can be seen from how he treats the old, weak, women, children, and sick among the southern barbarian captives.
If such a cruel and cold-blooded person is recruited to surrender, there is a high possibility that he will betray us in the future. My lord should not take this risk. My lord, please reconsider and consider it carefully. Xueqi threw out a brick to attract Jade. He explained most of the reasons. Under Jiang Pengji's murderous gaze, Feng Zhan and the others could not continue to slack off. I really think that Zixiao is right. Feng Zhan stood up and added, according to the previous judgment, my lord can indeed take over all of Xueqi's remaining troops by asking him to surrender. However, Xueqi's troops have long run out of food. Our army will only need to besiege them for a few more days to starve most of them to death. It will be effortless. Since it will take a few more days to make them surrender obediently, why would my lord need to specially ask for Xueqi's surrender? I agree with Zixiao and Zishi's deduction. Yang Si followed up with a violent attack. There are still 300,000 to 500,000 troops under Xueqi's command at the front line and at the rear. If Xueqi is still alive, my lord will not be able to use these troops in the short term. The disadvantages outweigh the advantages. Therefore, my lord, you understand. The steps have been set up. You should quickly go down. After the meeting, everyone should go back early to catch up on their sleep. After Yang Si finished speaking, a few more people spoke up. The voices in favor of killing Xueqi were overwhelming. If that's the case, we'll do as everyone says. Jiang Pengji seemed to have made up her mind about something. She said, tomorrow, we'll send out troops and kill him as a sacrifice. All right, the meeting was coming to an end. The battle plan for tomorrow had been confirmed. Chapter 1689. That was true, but there weren't many who were in the mood to sleep after they returned. The battle the next day was crucial. It was a good opportunity for everyone to fight for credit and gain experience. No one wanted to miss it. Just thinking about it made him excited. How could he fall asleep? Not only could they not sleep, but the captives in Xueqi and the others could not sleep either. They were anxious about their future. All of them looked dejected, like stray dogs. How does Lu Shi plan to deal with us tomorrow? Everyone had the same thought in their minds. No one wanted to die, but the butcher's knife was in the hands of the enemy. There was nothing they could do. What are you afraid of? At most, we'll die. Why should a man be afraid of death? A burly man with a bad temper said stubbornly, I've heard that Lu Shi has killed countless people and is ruthless. If we don't surrender, we'll most likely die. If we surrender, we'll have to be subservient to this person for the rest of our lives. It's better to die than to be humiliated like this. If you're greedy for life and afraid of death, then surrender. When everyone heard this, their faces turned ashen. They didn't know if they were frightened by the burly man's words or angered by them. Someone said, Is Lu Shi really so overbearing? If you don't surrender, you can just return to your hometown. Why do you want to kill people to vent your anger? Although it was normal to kill captives, not every captive could be killed. Scribes had certain privileges in this regard. At most, they could live in seclusion. They didn't have to sacrifice their lives. Of course, even though they said that, these people who were once in high positions of power and played with the wind and clouds couldn't be content with peace. The choices in front of them were really limited. They had to worry about their heads. In fact, many of them already had the idea of surrendering. It didn't matter which boss they worked for. Whoever gave them money, power, and status would be their bread and butter. If Xueqi was defeated, they would jump ship. This was normal. However, these words were too embarrassing to say. Whoever said it first would seem like the one who was fickle, and a vile person without loyalty. In particular, the burly man spoke heroically. Whoever mentioned surrendering to Jiang Pengji would be the first to stand out. To prevent the atmosphere from becoming too awkward, someone cleverly changed the topic. Our lives and deaths are still a small matter, but the Lord's situation is really not good. If they submitted, they would have a chance to climb up in the future. Didn't they see that Huang Song and Yang Tao's former officials were still enjoying themselves in Jiang Pengji's tent? If Xueqi pledged allegiance to Jiang Pengji, the outcome would be different. In the future, he would be conferred the title of Marquis to appease them. He would have no real power in his hands and no more than 3 to 5 followers. He could only be an animal in Jiang Pengji's pen for the rest of his life, constantly worrying about his own life.
Who would be willing to live such a life if they had a bit of dignity? And Shui had once been an all-powerful duke, so he could not tolerate such a great disparity. Master. Sigh, we can only blame ourselves for being useless and unable to protect Master. Everyone sighed and groaned, trying to push the blame onto themselves. It was as if Shui's current predicament was their fault. No matter how affectionate their words were, it was useless. These words would not bring any substantial harm to them. Instead, it would deepen their image of loyalty and righteousness, so why not? They were no fools. They had a vague idea of what had happened to Shui. And Shui probably wouldn't be able to escape this calamity. Even so, they hadn't expected Jiang Pengji to deal with Shui by killing him and sacrificing him to the flag. What was sacrificing to the flag? Before the army set off, they sacrificed living creatures to the gods and prayed for the gods' blessings to achieve victory. Jiang Pengji had always disliked superstition. In the more than 10 years of war, the number of times she sacrificed to the flag was pitifully few. Most of the time, it wasn't to pray for blessings to the gods, but to kill the enemy to boost morale. The living creatures she sacrificed to the flag included, but were not limited to, chickens, ducks, fish, geese, pigs, dogs, cows, sheep, enemies, and traitors. For example, during the battle in Changye, the fellows who had jumped between her and Huang Song had been captured by her tricks and killed as a sacrifice to the flag. However, most of these living creatures were small pawns. It was the first time she had encountered a leader like Shui. On the second day, the army gathered neatly. The half-dead Shui was carried to the altar. Upon seeing this, Shui understood his fate. He was so angry that his face darkened. Lu Shi, how dare you humiliate me like this? Killing a duke to sacrifice to the flag. Weren't you afraid that this display would cause dissatisfaction among the scholars of the world? Jiang Pengji pressed her left hand on the hilt of her sword. With a cold expression she said, "How can this be called humiliating? You're unwilling to pledge allegiance to me, but I can't possibly release you as a commoner. Isn't this your fate of choice? How can you blame me?" Jiang Pengji's counterattack last night had been merciless. Even though the arrow hadn't hurt Shui's thigh artery, it had made him wish he were dead. Later, when the medics pulled out the arrow to stop the bleeding, he fainted from the pain. After a round of torment, he had lost half his life. Now that he had been captured and brought to the altar as a sacrifice, Shui's spirit became more and more dispirited. His angry questioning just now was more like the final radiance of a setting sun. No matter how angry Shui was, he couldn't change the fate of the loser. Someone had gagged his mouth with a dirty handkerchief, and he was forced to kneel on the ground. With the posture of a sinner, he showed his sorry state to the thousands of soldiers below him. His opponent, Jiang Pengji, accepted everyone's worship and submission to her as a ruler. Shui's hands were tied behind his back with hemp rope. His shoulders were suppressed by 2 burly men on his left and right. His head, which was usually held high, had no choice but to hang down. No matter how he struggled, he couldn't move an inch. Apart from causing the wound on his thigh to open up and blood to flow, he didn't gain anything else. After an unknown amount of time, perhaps an hour, perhaps only half a cup of tea's time, a blinding white light flashed before his eyes. Shui subconsciously shrunk his head. He closed his left eyelid, which had been hit by the white light, and used his right eye to see the source of the white light. It turned out to be the saber at Jiang Pengji's waist. The morning sun rose slowly from the east. Puff! The saber in her hand fell. With a flash of white light, Shui's head was separated from his corpse. Fresh blood sprayed onto the altar like a pillar, dyeing it scarlet. The soldiers who witnessed this scene let out a tsunami of cheers. The Lu flag fluttered in the wind, forming a sea of red. The army has set out for battle. We wish you all a triumphant return. The general said, "We swear to live up to our mission even if we die." Dozens of people shouted. Their voices reverberated in the drill ground, stirring up waves of hot blood and making one's heart surge. There was no need to elaborate on the outcome of letting a group of jackals, who had been boosted by morale, go on a punitive expedition against a group of stray dogs with low morale and a lack of food and rations. After this battle, Jiang Pengji defeated Shui's remaining army of more than 200,000 with only 100,000 troops. She achieved a complete victory. The 3 armies continued south along the river, heading straight for Shui's lair. 2/3 of Nanxing had fallen into Jiang Pengji's hands. The enemy troops along the way had little power to resist. Chapter 1690. When there was no tiger in the mountain, the monkey was king. This was probably referring to the Xueqi emperor concubine. Ever since the young master committed suicide, Hua Yuan rarely visited the Xueqi emperor concubine. No one knew what he was busy with every day, and he was very mysterious. Without Hua Yuan's interference, the Xueqi emperor concubine's days were very comfortable. All the servants in the mansion treated her as their most precious treasure. The old officials would often send their wives over to visit her, and the gifts they gave her were all precious and rare. The days of being worshipped and fawned upon by others was before the fall of Xueqi kingdom. The Xueqi emperor concubine regained the feeling of being above everyone else and almost forgot all the unhappiness and hardships she had suffered. However, she was soon unable to be happy. The delayed pregnancy almost caused her to lose her form. Nausea and vomiting, dizziness and fatigue, drowsiness and salivation. One symptom after another found her and took up almost all of her energy. When she finally got used to it, her swollen legs and ugly marks on her stomach made her feel disgusted. The first time she felt the movement of the fetus, this disgust reached its peak. Looking at her balloon-like belly, the Xueqi emperor concubine would often wake up from nightmares. In her dreams, she would dream that she had given birth to a monster with 3 heads and 6 arms. This monster had 3 eyes, 4 mouths, and each foot only had 2 toes. It could speak the human language the moment it was born. Every time she had nightmares, this monster would use its limbs to burst open her belly and climb out with a hideous smile. It would open its mouth and devour her organs clean. Every time she woke up screaming, she would realize that she was covered in cold sweat and her stomach was in pain. The doctor did not dare to use strong medicine because the fetus in her belly was too precious. He could only use a mild sedative to help her sleep. After a few days of rest, the nightmares and night sweats had clearly weakened. The maid carefully asked for her opinion. "Madam, the weather is very good today. Do you want to take a walk in the courtyard?" The Xueqi emperor concubine slept until dawn, which was a rare occurrence. Her irritable mood had greatly improved, and the maid who served her also heaved a sigh of relief. If this continued, they would go crazy before the Xueqi emperor concubine gave birth. Emperor concubine Xueqi had eaten an exquisite breakfast and was in a good mood. When she looked up and saw the golden sunlight shining down from outside, she was instantly excited. With one hand on her waist and the other on her round belly, she walked slowly with the help of her maid. As her body was too heavy, Xueqi's empress concubine felt tired after walking one round. She returned to the house and leaned lazily against the table. In order to pass the time, Xueqi's empress concubine deliberately looked for a maidservant to chat. "Is there anything new out there recently?" The maid thought about it carefully and said, "I didn't hear anything special." "What about Counselor Hua?" The Xueqi empress concubine probably felt that her question was too straightforward, so she pretended to hide it and explained, "He is, after all, the most valued minister of the old master. The old master is fighting on the front lines, and the matters in the rear, including the mother and son, are entrusted to him. That is why I asked this question. I don't know why, but I've been so flustered these past few days. I've been having nightmares about terrible things in the middle of the night." Of course, Xueqi's empress concubine would not say that she had dreamed of giving birth to a monster. Instead, she said that she had a nightmare because she was too worried about Xueqi. The maid did not suspect anything. She said, "Counselor Hua? I've heard a little about it. I've heard that Counselor Hua hasn't been himself lately." Xueqi's empress concubine's eyebrows twitched. "What's not himself?" Usually, military Counselor Hua was gentle and courteous. However, after the young lord passed away, he seemed to have changed into a different person. Not only was he irritable, he even whipped the servants who made mistakes to death. The maid, who did not know the inside story, could not help but sigh. "That's true. Counselor Hua has been young master's disciple for many years. If the young master commits a mistake and is trying to escape punishment, Counselor Hua will definitely be affected." The maid was straightforward and almost said that the young master had committed suicide to escape punishment. This was a taboo that everyone kept to themselves. If she said the wrong thing, she would lose her life. Fortunately, she stopped in time, and Xueqi's empress concubine did not blame her for speaking out of turn. That was how she managed to keep her life. Xichong's empress concubine revealed a hint of mockery. And Xue's adopted young master had died at Hua Yuan's hands. It was good enough that he did not wake up laughing in the middle of the night. How could he be sad? As for the maids easily angered and whipping, these changes were not a huge change in temperament in Xichong's empress concubine's eyes. It was clear that Hua Yuan had revealed his true nature. He was finally willing to tear off the mask of a gentleman that he had maintained for so many years and return to his true self. Apart from that, is there nothing else? Xichong's empress concubine stroked her belly from time to time. She felt sleepy. The gossipy maid revealed a troubled expression. Xichong's empress concubine caught it and said, "If there's anything, just say it. Don't beat around the bush and be secretive. It's better if you say it now. It's better than if I somehow hear it in the future and alarm the little ancestor in my belly." The maid gritted her teeth and said, "Madam, I heard some bad news 2 days ago. It said that the situation at the front lines is not good." Xichong's empress concubine's heart tightened as she asked, "Not good? How is it not good? How would I know? I only heard it from a martial artist with some connections. I'm not too sure about the specifics." After the maid finished speaking, she pleaded, "Madam, these things cannot be spread. If the head nanny finds out, I'll lose my life." Xichong's empress concubine replied casually, "I know. I won't tell anyone." She thought that the situation at the front lines was not good. That was also within Hua Yuan's plans, so she was not worried at all. Who would have thought that Hua Yuan was already a complete lunatic? Others could not predict his next move at all. His operations were a mystery. When the news that Xue had been killed by Jiang Pengji as a sacrifice came back, Xichong's empress concubine was still dumbfounded. "Who did you say died?" Xichong's empress concubine held her belly with one hand with difficulty. She grabbed the maid's hand with the other, her long fingernails digging into the maid's flesh. The maid's expression was hideous from the pain, but she did not dare to scream or shake off Xichong's empress concubine's hand. She could only grit her teeth and hold on. The messenger paused, and his voice could not help but lower. "Our lord is dead." Dead? And Xue was dead? Even though Xichong's empress concubine was already mentally prepared, she was still shocked when she heard the news. No matter how bad Xue was, he was Xichong's empress concubine's greatest support at the moment. Her support had suddenly fallen. She was a sensitive and thoughtful pregnant woman, so her state of mind was naturally different from that of a normal person. How did he die? The messenger did not seem to want to answer this question, but he had no choice but to. After all, Xue's death was too humiliating for a noble. Chapter 1691. But no matter how vague it was, it could not change reality. 2/3 of Nanxing had fallen into the hands of the enemy, leaving her and her child with only 1/3 of the territory and the barren land of the southern barbarians. Now they had to face the pressure of the enemy. It was hard to say if they could keep this bit of territory. 2/3 of Nanxing was in the hands of the enemy, leaving her and her child with only 1/3 of the territory and the barren land of the southern barbarians. The current situation was set up by that bastard Hua Yuan. He should have a backup plan, right? The Xichong emperor's concubine felt uneasy. She had sacrificed everything in exchange for a few short months of peace. She did not want to go back to her days of wandering. As the emperor's concubine, she was born into a noble family. How could she live a life worse than that of a commoner? And Xue was dead. The only person she could rely on was Hua Yuan. Little did she know that the outside world was also in a mess. The complexity of the situation was not something a woman trapped in the inner courtyard like her could imagine. In order to eliminate dissidents, Hua Yuan had secretly forced many people to die. These people had discovered the abnormality of the rations, but could not find the culprit. As a result, they alerted the enemy and ended up on Hua Yuan's death list. No one knew that Hua Yuan's personality had changed greatly recently. He was not just irritable and easily whipped to death servants who made mistakes. On the day the young master committed suicide, Hua Yuan's main personality was awake for a short period of time, but it was quickly suppressed by the split, Lu Shi. From then on, the frequency of the main personality's awakening increased, but it was still very short, so short that it was not enough for the main personality to commit suicide. When the secondary personality realized this, he began to doubt himself uncontrollably, causing his condition to worsen. In the end, He even had auditory, visual, smell, taste, and touch hallucinations. It was so severe that he could not distinguish reality from hallucinations. Sometimes he laughed excitedly, sometimes he was irritable, sometimes he was sad, sometimes he was anxious and depressed. Even his dream of hegemony lost its motivation. It was as if there was a voice in his heart telling him over and over again that this world was boring and that fighting for hegemony was useless. He was alone, but he could hear all sorts of noises. There were women calling him, men laughing and scolding by his ear, and the young master who had passed away happily called him teacher in a childish voice. He could still hear Xueqi calling his name in a dignified voice in his dreams, and people he didn't know chattered by his ear without end. In a trance, he might see a familiar person waving at him from the end of the road, but when he washed his hands with cold water, he felt like he was being burned. He insisted that the basin of cold water was not cold water, but a basin of charcoal, that there were other people in the room besides him and his attendants, that it was not a sunny day outside, but a storm and lightning. But the attendants who served him looked shocked and frightened, as if he had said something terrible. Hua Yuan insisted that he was right, so the servant who refuted him was naturally wrong. An inexplicable anger dyed his eyes red. When he came back to his senses, the servant was lying on the ground in a bloody mess, without a sound. In his hand, he was holding the whip that had caused his attendant's skin and flesh to split open. The whip was so deep that the bone could be seen. Bright red blood flowed down to his feet. The socks under his feet were full of the attendant's blood, and every step he took left a pair of bloody footprints. Hua Yuan resisted this strange version of himself. He was Lu Shi, the Lu Shi of Hejian County, not a lunatic with a clear mind. The more he denied it, the more frequent the hallucinations became. Once, when he was dealing with government affairs, he suddenly smelled something burning. When he looked up, he saw the red flames engulfing the house. He shouted, "The water is on fire!" and hurriedly ran out of the fire, but the people who heard the news said that there was no fire. It was still daytime, and the candles were not lit. It was raining heavily outside, so how could there be a fire? Hua Yuan was stunned, and his face turned pale. He tried to cover up the matter, saying that he was frightened by a nightmare. That night, he dreamed of a person he hadn't thought of for a long time, Lu Zhang. In the dream, he and Lu Zhang were arguing fiercely, replaying the scene of their confrontation that year. Lu Zhang questioned him. His every word was powerful and resonant. "Do you really think you are Lu Shi? You are just a figment of Hua Yuan's imagination after he lost his mind." Hua Yuan was so angry that he wanted to pull out a knife and chop Lu Zhang's mouth. "If you are Lu Shi, why don't you think about your experience since you were young?" Hua Yuan refused to admit it. Although his memory of the past was very blurry, he thought that it was because he woke up in a stranger's body. As long as he took back his body and identity, everything would get better. "You say you are Lu Shi. Then do you remember that when I was studying in Langya County, I drank with you at the mountain gazing pavilion? What did you and I talk about in that pavilion?" "You can't answer because you are not Lu Shi. You are Hua Yuan, from Nanxing Ningzhou." "No." Hua Yuan clenched his molars and silently refuted Lu Zhang's bewitching words. "You have parents, older brothers, twin brothers, who died young, parents, passed away due to an epidemic. Your property was taken away by your uncle and aunt. They raised you. You are weak and married a slut. This woman had an affair and gave birth to a son and a daughter. However, the other party was relentless." His voice was like the ubiquitous air and the most vicious curse, firmly occupying Hua Yuan's ears. "You are not Lu Shi at all. You are a lunatic who has lost his mind but doesn't know who he is." "I am not." Hua Yuan roared as he sat up straight. The sleeping clothes he was wearing were already drenched in sweat, and his long hair seemed to have been scooped out of the water. "I am not. I am not. I am not." He grabbed the sword on the shelf and pulled it out with a swoosh. He waved it everywhere as if he had gone mad. The servants on night watch outside heard the commotion and did not dare to enter the room to take a look. When the sun rose the next day, the servant heard the commotion in the room and finally opened the door with trembling hands. Hua Yuan's bedroom had been smashed to pieces, and almost nothing in the room was intact. The servant's heart trembled as he carefully looked for Hua Yuan. In the end, he found the other party in white sleeping clothes walking out of the corner. He was so scared that his eyes almost rolled back. "When is it?" Hua Yuan looked dispirited and his voice was hoarse. He looked like he had overindulged after taking a few women at night. Seeing that Hua Yuan was still conscious, the servant whispered, "It was just the beginning of the morning." The beginning of the morning? That was still very early. Hua Yuan asked the servant to prepare hot water for him to wash up and change his clothes. After eating breakfast, he went to work. He had not even warmed his seat when he received the news that Xueqi had died. Xueqi had died. Logically speaking, Xueqi was Hua Yuan's imaginary enemy. Hua Yuan should be cheering in his heart even if he did not show any joy on his face. In the end, is there a leak in the room? He looked up. The roof was fine. Chapter 1692. The Lord was dead, and the young Lord was gone. Xueqi's other relatives had all died in the Nanman disaster. Faced with this situation, everyone wanted to curse in their hearts. Whether it was them or Xueqi when he was alive, who hadn't privately mocked Jiang Pengji that she was destined to be taken advantage of. Some people even thought maliciously that if Jiang Pengji collapsed in the middle of the road and all her hegemony would end up benefiting others, would she come back to life from anger when she saw this in the netherworld? They used this as evidence to demonstrate the inferiority of female feudal officials, once again confirming that the existence of female feudal officials was unreasonable. In the end, after many years, Jiang Pengji, who still had 0 children, was still alive and kicking, able to fight, write, and smile. What about Xueqi? Xueqi was dead, and the heir who was about to come of age was gone. His hegemony was about to end. Oh, that was not right. The Xichang princess still had Xueqi's posthumous child in her womb, so it could not be considered as the end of the line yet. However, what use could a baby who was not yet born and whose gender was unknown be? Could it be that they should work together to resist foreign enemies and wait for the child to be born before worshipping him as master? From the child's birth to adulthood, it would be a full 20 years. The key was that the child's aptitude was unknown. The late Lord Xueqi passed away suddenly, and he did not have the chance to appoint a minister to entrust the child to before he died. Hearing this, perhaps someone would ask questions in a good mood. Didn't Xueqi think highly of Hua Yuan, then Lu Zheng? If he were to choose who to entrust the child to, these two would undoubtedly be the first choice? That being said, if Xueqi did not personally appoint them, who would be convinced? Even a fool would know that whoever became the minister would temporarily exercise authority on behalf of the Lord. He was not a feudal official, but he was better than a feudal official. If the minister was more ambitious, it was possible to seize power and occupy the late Lord's estate. Even if Xueqi's estate was in a precarious state, it could not stop the greed of people. In the face of a big enough temptation, there would always be people who like to abandon their brains and choose to think with their bare eyes. With both external and internal troubles, the Xichang princess, who thought she was in a stable position, panicked. Once the news of Xueqi's death came, the wife of the minister who attended to her every day did not come, as if they had a tacit understanding. Not only that, but the servants who served her were also somewhat neglectful. They were not as careful as before. This gave the Xichang princess an ominous feeling. With a big belly, she visited Hua Yuan in the middle of the night to find a solution. In the end, she didn't see Hua Yuan. Instead, she saw her brother. After Xichang's empress concubine successfully got pregnant, the siblings reduced their private interactions. Although the royal family often did dirty things, it did not mean that the members of the royal family could accept the siblings without any grudges. The Xichang imperial concubine was rather disgusted by this matter. If not for the sake of survival and long-term considerations, she would not have easily compromised with Hua Yuan. Meeting again after several months, the atmosphere between the brother and sister was a little strange. However, no matter how awkward it was not as important as her own life. Xichang's empress concubine hurriedly asked her brother. The Prince of Xichang looked much healthier than the last time they met. However, he had not rested well in recent days and looked listless. I'm afraid we've fallen into Hua Yuan's trap. The Prince of Xichang looked at his sister sorrowfully with a heavy sense of exhaustion. Emperor concubine Xichang's heart tightened. A trap? Why? She stared at her brother's mouth, worried that he would say something despairing. We were too naive at the time and underestimated the viciousness of the human heart. That's why we were deceived by Hua Yuan's flowery words, the Prince of Xichang said tiredly. And Xueqi is dead. The young master is dead. Other than the one in your womb, and Shui does not have a single bloodline on the surface. Logically speaking, everyone should treat this bloodline as their master and let Hua Yuan be an important minister. Hua Yuan will be able to rightfully control power through you and your child. Although she would be a puppet by doing this, at least she would not have to worry about food and clothing. In the future, when her child grew up, Xichang's empress concubine could use their mother-son relationship to pull her child to her side. She could work hard to make Hua Yuan a mere figurehead and burn the bridge after crossing it. In the end, she would be able to make a comeback. Xichang's empress concubine was stunned. She pretended to be calm. Isn't that the case? This plan seems to be going smoothly, but in reality, there are 3 prerequisites. What prerequisites? First, the power that Shui left behind must be strong enough to last until your son grows up. Xichang's empress concubine was speechless. With Shui's death, his power was on the verge of collapse. The enemy would not let go of such a good opportunity to beat him while he was down. Even though she was a woman from the inner courtyard, she knew that this matter was very dangerous. If she continued to struggle, even 2 years would be difficult, much less 20 years. Second, Shui appointed Hua Yuan as an important minister. Everything is in the open. Xichang's empress concubine gritted her teeth. But that person is already dead. He left nothing behind. Shui had died too quickly. Not only had he buried hundreds of thousands of soldiers with him, he had not left behind any arrangements for a successor. No, I still have this. The empress concubine caressed her belly as if she was clutching at her last straw. The prince asked her, "Who says that Shui's bloodline will definitely inherit Shui's legacy?" The empress concubine was stunned by the question. "You say someone will usurp the throne?" The prince sighed. Since ancient times, there have been many magnanimous dukes who, for the sake of the bigger picture, entrusted their legacy to important ministers. That's how it was recorded in the history books, and it led to a beautiful conversation between ruler and minister. Of course, there are also those who are thick-skinned enough to openly usurp power under the banner of completing the unfinished ambitions of the previous ruler. You and I were too naive before. It's too late to understand now. Top tacticians could understand the details immediately, but the siblings did not have the brains and carelessly fell into Hua Yuan's trap. The empress concubine's face paled. And third, Shui's old ministers are loyal enough. They will not harm you and your son for their own selfish desires. This was very difficult. These old ministers were already restless. Although they did not put their selfish desires on the surface, they still gave themselves away. The Xichang prince had thought that the first person to become restless would be Hua Yuan. He had not expected it to be Shui's other old ministers. These old ministers usually did not have much of a presence, but they were experienced and had outstanding family backgrounds. They belonged to the hidden faction of power. On the other hand, Hua Yuan. This guy had not made a move. It was really illogical. At present, the greatest danger that Xichang's empress concubine and her son faced was not from Hua Yuan, but from those old ministers who coveted Shui's legacy. The siblings had thought of things as a matter of course. When the truth was laid out in front of them, they were all dumbfounded. When Xichang's empress concubine heard this, her delicate body could not help but tremble. She asked him in a sobbing voice. "Royal brother, then what should we do?" The prince was also in despair. "Right now the only one who can protect us is Hua Yuan, but he..." The empress concubine hurriedly asked, "What happened to him?" "Ever since he lost his student, his mind has not been very clear. He often speaks crazily and whips people at the slightest provocation," the empress concubine said in shock. "How could this be? That young master was personally plotted against and forced to death by him. Now he's acting crazily. What was he doing earlier?" The prince shook his head. "I don't know." Chapter 1693. Could it be that he wants to play the fool and take advantage of everyone's fight, causing both sides to suffer, and then reap the benefits? Based on Hua Yuan's past behavior, this guess was not without reason. By doing so, he could easily exhaust the siblings to death, and he could borrow the hands of others to eradicate the bloodline in the empress concubine's womb. In the end, he could stand out at the crucial moment and use the crime of harming the deceased lord's child to get rid of the ambitious competitor. After all these twists and turns, Hua Yuan would still be the winner. If that's the case, then Hua Yuan's schemes are too terrifying. He's included almost everyone. The Empress concubine's guess was not without reason. Even the Xichang prince was convinced by her. But there was one thing he did not understand. But what benefits does he gain by doing this? The Empress concubine was stunned. She could not understand this question either. If Hua Yuan wanted to seize power, he had other ways to get rid of Shui and preserve his troops. He would not let Zhang Pengji take advantage of him. In the end, Hua Yuan did not use the best of both worlds method, and chose a method that harmed others without benefiting himself. The death of Hua Yuan would also cause the death of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The rear had rations, but not enough troops. How could they defend against the enemy? The enemy they were about to face was not an ordinary small fry. She was a veteran who had dominated the chaotic world for more than a decade. How was Hua Yuan so confident that he could defeat Zhang Pengji with his current forces? After thinking for a long time, the Empress concubine lowered her eyes and said sarcastically, "Forget it. How can normal people like us figure out the thoughts of a madman?" This topic was temporarily put aside. The most important thing now was to protect themselves and not to explore Hua Yuan's thoughts. In reality, the siblings were afraid of being tricked by Hua Yuan. They had subconsciously turned Hua Yuan into an omnipotent figure. How could Hua Yuan not be able to divine something that they all understood? There was a saying that went, "Man proposes, but God disposes." Who could truly predict everything? Hua Yuan's calculations were very thorough, but there were too many variables. The enemy was too strong, and Shui was too smart, and Shui had misjudged him. All sorts of variables converged together, resulting in this quantitative change that no one could have predicted. The Empress concubine stroked her round belly and sighed. Even if we know we've been tricked by Hua Yuan, what can we do? In the end, we still have to rely on him. This was the most ironic part. On one hand, they hated Hua Yuan, but on the other hand, they had no choice but to attach themselves to him for some security. The Empress concubine lowered her head, and naturally didn't see the prince's complicated expression and the humiliation he was bitterly suppressing. The atmosphere between the brother and sister was strangely stagnant. They looked at each other and tacitly avoided the common wound in their hearts. The prince said, "We were counting on him, but he wanted to abandon us." The Empress concubine wasn't discouraged. "Convince him, and we still have a chance to live. Everything has to be tried to know the result." None of the old officials Shui had left behind were reliable. When the Empress concubine thought of this, she gnashed her teeth in hatred. Shui had died not long ago. His corpse hadn't even gotten cold, yet these old officials were already impatiently fighting for power. Not only that, but they also wanted to harm their lord's posthumous child. Such a despicable act was simply unheard of. "I can't see him either." These few days. The Xichang prince shook his head. He suddenly thought of something and said unwillingly, "These 2 days, Hua Yuan's whereabouts are a mystery. He's pretending to be crazy again, and no one is keeping a close eye on him. Who knows where Hua Yuan ran off to? Sometimes he's crazy, and sometimes he's sober. He doesn't even recognize the old servant that has served him for many years. I've tried to visit him several times, but he's been blocked outside." The Xichang prince who lived in Hua Yuan's manor hadn't even seen him, much less the Xichang Empress concubine. The Empress concubine's face was deathly pale. "Is Hua Yuan sincerely avoiding us and refusing to see us?" If Hua Yuan really did close the door and refuse to see them, didn't that mean he was determined to abandon them and watch them die? The prince was hesitant. The Empress concubine said, "Imperial brother, if you have something to say, just say it. At this time, there's no need to avoid it. We can't rely on Hua Yuan, but there's one person who might be able to help us. At the very least, he can protect you and your mother's lives." When the Empress concubine heard this, her amorous eyes lit up. She hastily asked who it was. The prince spoke of a person the Empress concubine didn't expect. He said, "Lu Zheng Lu Xiaoyin." This person was originally Shui's most valued strategist in the early days. Later, Hua Yuan fought with him, and he lost. That's why he lost favor with Shui. Even so, Lu Zheng still has some prestige in Shui's camp. If he's willing to protect the late master Shui's posthumous son, you and your mother will most likely be able to survive this calamity. The Empress concubine didn't know much about Lu Zheng. She only knew that he existed, but she hadn't had much contact with him. Will that work? The Empress concubine hesitated. She was afraid of jumping out of Hua Yuan's pit and into another pit. The prince said, I've asked around in private. Lu Zhang was of humble birth, but his character is respectable. He doesn't have the disdainful flaws of those poor scholars. And Xueqi treated him so well, yet he never changed his mind and submitted to anyone else. He's clearly a loyal and devoted person. And Xueqi is already dead. No matter how he disheartened Lu Zhang when he was alive, he's already dead. How could Lu Zhang vent his anger on an innocent posthumous son? If you ask him for help, there's at least a 70% chance that he'll protect you and your mother, if not 100%. The Empress concubine was tempted by his words. However, the Xichang royal siblings would never have guessed that Lu Zhang had already disappeared from their investigations. And Xueqi's army had been defeated and killed. There had indeed been a small group of defeated soldiers who'd escaped by relying on tree bark and wild vegetables. They'd been starving along the way. Lu Zhang wasn't among this group of people. The Xichang Empress concubine didn't give up. She sent people to inquire again and finally found news of Lu Zhang. 1 or 2 days before Xueqi's death, Lu Zhang had fallen seriously ill and was sent to a nearby village to recuperate. He'd most likely either died of illness or starvation by now. Her last hope was shattered. In her despair, the Xichang Empress concubine moved the fetus. The doctor diagnosed that there were signs of a miscarriage. In order to protect the only trump card in her belly, she didn't dare to make any more trouble. She lay in bed for several days to recuperate. The Xichang siblings were no longer causing trouble. Hua Yuan was crazy and didn't care about anything. The other old officials fought for power and negotiated at the same time. Everything was a mess. When Xueqi's power was at its peak, he wasn't Zhang Pengji's match. Now that he was half dead, he obviously didn't have the ability to resist. Seeing that the war was going smoothly, she handed over the responsibility of the various battlefields to the other generals. She sat in the middle of the army and her days were leisurely. When the days were leisurely, she naturally had more time to do more things. For example, torturing the noobs. It wasn't that she was complaining, but Lu Zhang's chess skills were really bad. Lu Zhang was speechless. First, Wei Ci held his hand to discuss a game. Then he was pressed down by Zhang Pengji in front of the chessboard for a friendly exchange. Chapter 1694. Lu Zhang was not the type of person who would sit and wait for death. It was just that he was old now, and his words were not as sharp and straightforward as when he was young. Therefore, he mocked Zhang Pengji for not winning against Xueqi honorably, saying that it was all because of Xueqi's incompetent teammates that she could achieve what she had today. Zhang Pengji twirled the chess pieces and thought about her next move so that LV Zhang would lose more rhythmically. I didn't plan to spy around and... She thought that LV Zhang was mocking her for using spying to trick Xueqi. Even though this was a normal battle maneuver, and it wasn't a low-level one, she wouldn't admit that she hadn't done it before. Lu Zhang thought of the annoying Hua Yuan and the even more annoying Lu Shi personality. He sneered and said nothing. You're the only one I know among Andy's bunch of crooks. You can't be a spy that I sent, and I didn't do such a thing. Zhang Pengji defended herself and ridiculed Lu Zhang at the same time. She continued, besides, luck is also a part of one's strength. If he really wants to blame someone, he can only blame Xueqi for not being able to see through people and trusting the wrong person. How can he blame me for being too powerful and having a keen eye? Lu Zhang. Sure enough, it was a familiar taste, a familiar venomous tongue, and a familiar narcissism. It's not anyone else. It's Hua Yuan. To prevent Zhang Pengji from continuing to be narcissistic and disgusting, he chose to take the initiative to explain. Zhang Pengji was astonished. She had a very good memory, so she naturally knew who Hua Yuan was. Wasn't he that unlucky guy with schizophrenia? Xiaoyin, I don't understand what you're saying. I've only met Hua Yuan once. What can I possibly instigate in him? In the past, Hua Yuan represented Xueqi and formed an alliance with Zhang Pengji. They only met once. What could Zhang Pengji do in such a short time? Lu Zhang sighed and said, Hua Yuan has gone mad. A good counselor turned out to be a lunatic. It really made people sigh. Zhang Pengji vaguely felt that the words sounded familiar. She secretly glanced at Wei Ci. Wei Si had said something similar to her before. I know that. I had a feeling when I first met him. His mind was a little abnormal. But so what? He lost his mind and imagined himself to be Lu Shi. He imagined himself to be you. So how could he sincerely assist in Shui? Zhang Pengji's hand paused. What kind of personality did this lunatic split into? LV Zhang did not understand, so Zhang Pengji changed the way she asked. I mean, who does Hua Yuan think he is? LV Zhang didn't say anything. He just silently looked at her. The meaning was clear. After Zhang Pengji recovered from her shock, she quickly accepted the setting. So what? Without Hua Yuan, I'll be able to take down in Shui within the year. Lu Zhang said faintly. Arrogant and conceited. If Hua Yuan had not interfered, Lu Zhang would have been the one assisting in Shui. Would he allow Zhang Pengji to destroy the Shui line of defense within a year and conquer the entire territory? Zhang Pengji smiled. This is called knowing one's limitations. I never exaggerate my abilities. Lu Zhang could not help but roll his eyes. Although Lu Shi's personality had only been online for a short period of time, his destructive power was very strong. He still insisted that Zhang Pengji had won with the help of the enemy's stupid teammates. Little did he know that Lu Zhang was holding on to Wei Si's script in this life. Wei Si could pat his chest and guarantee that in his previous life, Her Majesty had won against Nanxing without doing anything. In his previous life, Shui had insisted on using all his troops to wipe out the 4 factions of Nanman. He had won, but his strength had been greatly damaged. In the end, Her Majesty, his neighbor, had picked up the spoils. Wherever the army passed, there was almost no decent resistance. They were like a hot knife through butter, and they had forced Shui to his death. Recently, Wei Si had rarely thought about his previous life. Now that he looked back, he realized that his old master Shui had not lived as well as he had in his previous life. In his previous life, he had at least committed suicide with dignity. In this life, he had been forced to the altar and killed by his lord. After placing the chess piece, Zhang Pengji asked LV Zhang, did Hua Yuan do anything disgusting? Although it was a personality created by Hua Yuan, this personality called himself Lu Shi. Whenever she thought of what disgusting things he had done with this identity, Zhang Pengji felt uneasy. It did not cause her any substantial harm, but it was disgusting. As soon as she asked, she remembered something. She had previously received information that one of the siblings from the Xichang royal family whom she had chased away had been kept by Shui, and the other had been given to Hua Yuan as a reward? In an instant, Zhang Pengji's face turned green. She wanted to kill Hua Yuan with her own hands, and no one could stop her. Unexpectedly, just as Zhang Pengji had made up her mind to kill Hua Yuan had disappeared. She was not mistaken, he had disappeared. At first, no one paid much attention to it, but when the old housekeeper realized that his master had not returned for 2 consecutive days, he sent someone to the magistrate's office to inquire. Only after asking did he find out that they had not seen Hua Yuan for a day or 2. The servant's heart thumped, and he hurriedly passed the news to the old housekeeper. All the servants and maids in the manor were sent out to search. They inquired along the way, and after a thorough search, they finally found some clues. Some people who had witnessed it said that someone who looked like Hua Yuan had staggered out of the north of the city. They searched along the way, but they soon lost track of him. Only then did everyone realize a serious problem. Hua Yuan did not seem to be pretending to be crazy. He was really crazy. What should we do now? Not only were the servants and maids in Hua Yuan's manor panicking, but Hua Yuan's former colleagues were also panicking. Those old foxes who had been fighting openly and covertly even stopped fighting. They knew how much the late lord, Shui, valued Hua Yuan. The latter held considerable military power. If they wanted to gather their troops and work together to resist the invading Zhang Pengji, Hua Yuan could not be lost. Now that Hua Yuan had gone completely crazy, what could they do if he left them behind? What else can we do? Search. I don't believe that we can't find him even if we dig 3 feet into the ground. Heaven always failed those who tried. After half a month, they still could not find Hua Yuan's whereabouts. Instead, they found a lot of specious clues. They sent people to search, but they found nothing every time. They went around in circles, almost turning the ground upside down, but they did not even see Hua Yuan's shadow. To be honest, if not for the fact that Hua Yuan had really gone crazy, they would have suspected that this was another trap set by Hua Yuan. With so many internal troubles and endless external troubles, they could only temporarily put aside the matter of Hua Yuan's disappearance and focus on fighting the enemy. However, Jiang Pengji did not care whether they were ready to fight or not. She fought wherever she went, and she did not stop along the way. She was like a hot knife through butter. The old officials in Xueqi's camp were not blind. In fact, they were better at protecting themselves than anyone else. Seeing that the situation was hopeless and that Jiang Pengji was destined to win, they planned to lead their troops and surrender before Jiang Pengji used force to break open the city gates. Was surrendering something shameful? Of course not. This was called obeying fate. Autumn had just arrived that year, and the city gates of Xueqi's old nest were open to welcome the new lord. To show their sincerity, they presented Jiang Pengji with a gift that had a special meaning. Looking at the Xichang princess's pregnant belly, which was about to give birth, Jiang Pengji's expression changed. Using a pregnant woman and a posthumous child of the late lord to ask for credit from the new lord was really a cunning move. Chapter 1695. Who is this? The Xichang emperor's concubine was already very pregnant. Her stomach was so heavy that she needed to support it with both hands to feel better. Jiang Pengji pretended not to recognize her, but the salted fish in the streaming room really could not. Zhenguang Shengji Ji. This lady looks familiar, but I can't remember where I've seen her before. Does anyone remember her? Candy Factory. She looks familiar too. Although she's very swollen during pregnancy, her facial features are quite beautiful. Her actual appearance should be pretty good, right? The number of pretty girls in the streaming room can be counted on one hand. With such good looks, she shouldn't be unknown. The power of 5 million salted fishes was not to be underestimated. There were always a few salted fishes with better memories. Host marry me. Wait, I remember now. No wonder she looks familiar. She seems to be the Xichang emperor's concubine. Someone recalled it and gave a hint, but most of the salted fish were still in a state of confusion. Who was the Xichang emperor's concubine? Was she famous? However, just by hearing the title emperor's concubine, one could tell that she came from a noble background and had an extraordinary status. After following the map, everyone finally matched the Xichang emperor's concubine with some memories that were thrown in a corner. Many people suddenly realized that it was her. 200 kilograms salted fish. The Xichang emperor's concubine? I have some impression of this woman. How did she become like this? Back then, there was a salted fish who participated in Dream of 1,000 Years, and became the guard that escorted the Xichang emperor's concubine and the Xichang prince. The salted fish in the streaming room also saw the fairy-like siblings through the perspective of Dream of 1,000 Years. They both had faces that made people want to fall in love at first sight. It had only been a year since they last saw each other. How did the Xichang emperor's concubine become like this? Actually, it was not difficult to guess. The Xichang emperor's concubine was now Xueqi's concubine. She was pregnant with Xueqi's posthumous child. She was considered a rather special prisoner of war. Jiang Pengji did not intend to make things difficult for her, but she could not stop a few of Xueqi's former officials from taking a shortcut. They took the initiative to present the Xichang emperor's concubine to take credit and flatter her. Pregnancy was a very difficult matter. Xichang's empress concubine's pregnancy was not very stable. In addition, she was constantly worried that her child's bloodline would be exposed, so her pregnancy was even more difficult. So many changes had happened in the past few months that she was on tenterhooks even in her dreams. As a result, she looked haggard and old. Her face was swollen several times, and the fat piled up on her double chin. Her thick neck made her collarbone disappear, and her red phoenix eyes were squinted. Where was the fairy-like face that made people fall in love at first sight? If it weren't for the fact that his facial features still had traces of being at the peak of his attractiveness, even if 5 million salted fish gathered together, they wouldn't be able to guess who he was. Without batting an eyelid, Jiang Pengji took the initiative to present the surrendered officials of the Xichang emperor concubine as an explanation. This person was originally a concubine of the Xichang royal family. She was later taken in as a concubine by the late lord in Xueqi. The child in her womb is the late lord's posthumous child. Hearing the surrendered official say this, the expressionless Xichang emperor concubine finally reacted.
She covered her face with her empty hand as though she could not bear it.
Jiang Pengji looked away. And Xue's posthumous son?
I thought that you would care about the relationship between the ruler and the subject and preserve the last of his bloodline.
The expressions of the surrendered officials suddenly changed, as if they had been painted with a thick layer of white paint. They'd only heard that Jiang Pengji was difficult to deal with, but they didn't expect her to be so harsh with her words. She didn't leave them any face at all.
What she'd said just now was just short of pointing at their noses and scolding them as heartless and unscrupulous villains.
For a moment, their faces were a little hot, as if they'd been slapped a few times in the face in front of the world.
However, the older the wiser.
They were all people who were used to great storms and waves. Their mental fortitude was rather strong, and they wouldn't change their expressions because of this. Not only would they not change their expressions, but they would also find a suitable excuse to save some face for themselves in the shortest time possible. Why had they offered in Xue's concubine and posthumous son? It was all for their new lord, Jiang Pengji. Since Jiang Pengji was the person destined by the heavens, even if Xue was their former lord, they had to look up to a wise lord. Whoever the heavens had chosen to be the true dragon emperor, they should follow the will of the heavens to assist that person. How could they do something that went against the will of the heavens because of a wrong relationship between the ruler and the subject? Moreover, since Jiang Pengji was the true dragon emperor, she had a heart that could accept all rivers running into the sea. How could she be so petty that she couldn't even accept the posthumous son of a defeated opponent? They offered in Xue's concubine and posthumous son, naturally, not to take credit and curry favor. Regardless of whether she could accept them or not, they'd said what needed to be said and done what needed to be done. They'd fulfilled their duties as subjects. The rest was Jiang Pengji's business.
They were indeed old fellows who had lived a long life.
They had a sense of propriety. If it had been someone else who had the bad habit of being overzealous, these words would have had a huge effect. Which person in a high position wouldn't like to listen to flattery?
However, the person they were facing now was none other than Jiang Pengji.
Jiang Pengji ignored the flattery of these old fellows and turned to ask about the age of the fetus in Xicheng's princess's womb. The princess's voice was very embarrassed. She wished she could dig a hole and bury herself in it. She didn't know how she'd gotten to this point. The first time she saw Jiang Pengji, she was still the princess of a country and received courteous treatment. Now, however, she was the concubine of a defeated opponent. Naturally, she was a captive and in existence at the mercy of others. Jiang Pengji silently calculated the time in her heart. The other party was about to give birth soon. You are in Xue's concubine, and you're pregnant with his posthumous son. I've never liked to make things difficult for the old, weak, women, and children. And Xue's bloodline is only left with this one in your womb. Then you can rest assured and give birth to this child. I'll send people to take care of you and your son. She didn't have any emotional fluctuations, as if the princess was an unimportant passerby. In reality, she was indeed a passerby, not worthy of her attention. The princess had thought she was dead for sure. She'd never expected this outcome. If she could live, could the child in her womb also live? For a moment, the princess's heart was filled with mixed feelings. Thousands of thoughts tangled in her heart. These days, she'd racked her brains for survival. She'd been anxious and uneasy for so long. To her, matters of life and death were not worth mentioning in Jiang Pengji's eyes. With a few simple words, she decided whether she lived or died. She decided the future of the child in her womb. The jealousy in the princess's heart churned endlessly. The sour taste almost surged up her throat. Was this what it felt like to hold great power? A single word determined life. A single word threatened death. It wasn't until now that the princess understood what it meant to say, "Thunder, rain, and dew are all the king's grace." Jiang Pengji didn't care about the princess's matter. She was more concerned about Hua Yuan's whereabouts. That lunatic dared to imagine that he was Lu Shi? Chapter 1696. Hua Yuan had disappeared, and no one knew where he was. How did he disappear? Jiang Pengji couldn't believe it. Hua Yuan, the troublemaker, had disappeared just like that? The surrendered official replied, he had a relapse. He was unconscious and lost. What relapse? It seemed like he had lost his mind. Jiang Pengji was from the future world. She naturally knew that with the medical methods of this era, the result of losing his mind was death. Hua Yuan's ending was not surprising. A person who was conscious and crazy at times, and whose conscious time was getting shorter and shorter, would die in some corner. However, Hua Yuan's split personality, Lu Shi, was a hidden danger. It was best to confirm his death personally to be at ease. Zhang Pengji said, "Send someone to look for him. If he's alive, I want to see him. If he's dead, I want to see his corpse." The surrendered officials felt uneasy. Hua Yuan, who had already gone mad, made Zhang Pengji pay so much attention to him, but they, who had performed meritorious deeds, were given the cold shoulder. It was really unfair. Of course, they didn't dare to say this out loud. There was no dissatisfaction on their faces. Instead, they became more devout and obedient. Little did they know that Zhang Pengji wouldn't fall for it. She turned her head and said to Wei Ci and the others, "These people aren't useful. Let's observe them for a while. If they are obedient, let them do some trivial things. If they don't, let them go home and plant sweet potatoes." Although she hated them, these people could still be used. For example, they could do some trivial things. After all, Zhang Pengji was short of people. Nanqing's land area wasn't the largest among the 5 countries, but it wasn't the smallest either. If the land of the 4 factions of Nanman was included, it would be very significant. Behind the huge area was an urgent need for talents. Zhang Pengji could foresee how busy the following days would be. The original people in each of Nanqing's prefectures had to be screened. Those who could be used would be retained. Those who could not be used would be cleared out and replaced with new people. Because each prefecture had suffered for more than 10 years of war, the people's livelihood had withered, and the farmlands were abandoned. Many government agencies existed in name only. There were even local ruffians and local tyrants who relied on their power to become local tyrants. These were the stumbling blocks on the road to reconstruction. The project was huge. Zhang Pengji decided to deal with Nanqing first before going to Zhongzhou. She let Qiguan Rang and Sun Wen play first. Let's send out a recruitment notice and see how many people come to apply. This was like a recruitment notice. Those who were interested could apply, and those who weren't would just forget about it. However, the recruitment order in ancient times was a serious and sacred event, but Zhang Pengji made it seem like she was recruiting laborers. Job application? Feng Zhen's hand paused. Their lord often spoke terms that others didn't understand, and most of them were her own creations. It wasn't appropriate for them to ask too many questions, so they could only interpret the meaning of the words and understand them on their own. Fortunately, he had a smart brain. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to keep up with the pace. How does my lord intend to apply for the position? Zhang Pengji had issued recruitment announcements in the past, but the scale was not as large as this one. There were too many secondary people. I'll write a rule for you. According to the rule, issue the recruitment notice and let the applicants prepare their own materials. This will save you the trouble. As Zhang Pengji spoke, she picked up her pen and drew on a piece of paper. If the applicant is qualified, he can be recruited. It's very convenient. There was a huge problem with the employment system in this era. The transmission of information about talents depended on the recommendation of connections. In other words, those with connections, good family backgrounds, good looks would have a higher chance of becoming an official. Those from poor families didn't have this opportunity. They could only recommend themselves to be followers of others and attach themselves to the strong. If they were lucky enough to be chosen, they might have the opportunity to make a name for themselves. Zhang Pengji was in urgent need of manpower. She didn't have the time to dilly-dally. She handed the plan to Feng Zhen, who was in charge of the general rules. The specific contents of the recruitment notice were to be drawn up by Feng Zhen and a few others. Feng Zhen took a few glances, his eyebrows twitching non-stop. My lord, this isn't appropriate. She was treating talents as if they were cabbages and picky. She even wanted the cabbages to come personally. Zhang Pengji said, "What's inappropriate? I'm pressed for time and short of manpower. The opportunity is right in front of them. It's up to them whether they want to come or not. If they miss this opportunity, who would care about them? It's just a test of their true abilities. If they're afraid of even this, don't come asking for humiliation." Feng Zhen was speechless. Sigh, after so many years, his lord's temper was getting worse and worse. Of course, she also had the capital to throw a tantrum. Times were different now. She had 2 countries under her control. Those young people who were eager to become officials had to follow her rules. They had no right to act like they were big shots. Therefore, the recruitment notice this time was written differently. It was almost like the prototype of a company's recruitment in the future. As soon as the recruitment notice was announced, the circle of Nanqing's aristocratic families was shaken again. Was she treating them like cabbages to pick and choose? However, Jiang Pengji had millions of soldiers in her hands. Nanqing's aristocratic families had also suffered great losses in more than 10 years of war. They couldn't contend against her. If they couldn't contend, then so be it. Why couldn't they resist with cold force? Some aristocratic families with high temperament restrained their family members from applying for the job. On the contrary, those with shallow backgrounds wanted to use this opportunity to turn things around. There was no harm in taking the initiative to come to the door and let others pick and choose. Only by enduring the humiliation for a while could they have a bright future in the future. As this was the first time such a recruitment method was used, Xueqi and the others were worried that something would go wrong along the way. Those who were too young and inexperienced would not be able to control the situation. Therefore, they simply took turns to be the interviewers. As Jiang Pengji advanced step by step, they also became big shots in the eyes of outsiders. This decision was beyond everyone's expectations. What did this mean? It meant that the Duke of Lanting attached great importance to this recruitment. He was actually willing to send out so many big shots. With them as the interviewers, the scholars who came to apply for the job felt much better. The recruitment notice was very clear. Every scholar who came to apply for the job had made sufficient preparations. They couldn't wait to write down all their strengths. If it wasn't for the inappropriate occasion, they would probably be resumed, such as speaking at the age of 1, being literate at the age of 2, reading the Analects of Confucius at the age of 3, and reciting poems at the age of 4. Of course, Xueqi and the others were not there to listen to this nonsense. The examinations they prepared were very targeted. They strived to test the depth of the other party in the shortest time possible. In order to reduce mistakes and omissions, once they were hired, they would specially send people to examine the authenticity of the applicants' resumes. If there was any falsification, it would be a serious crime of deception. A light punishment would be jail time. A heavy punishment would implicate the reputation of the whole family and clan. The ugly words were said first. It extinguished the trend of falsifying resumes. Why do you come every time? The last applicant had just left. Feng Zhan took the time to drink a cup of strong tea to refresh himself. Xueqi asked in return, "Isn't this good?" "It's good. It's not that I'm afraid your body can't take it. If you're too tired." As he said this, Feng Zhan glanced at Xueqi's lower abdomen. His gaze was lewd. Xueqi was speechless. He was still flirtatious at this time. He should complain to Wan Xiu'er when he got back. Xueqi pursed his lips and did not speak. Feng Zhan was snubbed. He yawned and let the next applicant come in. Not long after, the scholar who was called came in with the attendants. Feng Zhan almost choked on his saliva when he saw it. She didn't have the face and temperament of his lord. Why didn't she dress as a man? Did she really think that they were all blind? Chapter 1697. Compared to Feng Zhan's loss of composure, Xueqi's reaction was much calmer. He didn't seem to see through the interviewer's clumsy disguise and glanced at the person's resume. The two words, Su Chun, were impressively in the list. It really was her. "What's your name?" Xueqi and a few others took turns interviewing, but Xueqi came to every class, not because he loved this job, but because he had the advantage of foresight compared to ordinary people. If he didn't make good use of this advantage to create value, wouldn't it be a pity? For example, for this interview, he had some impression of many of the scholars being interviewed. This was much more accurate than the resumes they submitted. Some of them were truly talented and virtuous, and could be employed without worry. But there were also slackers mixed in, and the interviewer had to find a way to check and identify them. If someone with bad intentions was successfully promoted, the people in Nanqing would be the unlucky ones. When the recruitment notice was first sent out, Xueqi was wondering if Su Chun would appear. He didn't expect her to really come. "My surname is Su, and my name is Chun. I'm from Ningzhou. Greetings to both of you." No need for formalities.
Wei Ci went straight to the point without any delay.
If you're ready, you can begin.
The girl said respectfully, I'm ready.
Sir, please set the question.
Feng Zhan was frantically hinting at Wei Ci with his peripheral vision, but the latter chose to be intermittently blind and ignored his little tricks.
Wei Ci was in charge of this interview.
When the interview assessment was over, he put the book of interview questions on the table.
That's enough. Go back and wait for news. There will be results in 3 days.
The girl bowed and retreated to wait for the other interviewer.
Taking advantage of this gap, Feng Zhen said, the content this person submitted is most likely fake. Why can't you tell?
Wei Ci said, it can't be fake.
She's obviously a woman.
If she really wanted to become an official, no one would stop her if she wore female clothes. Why did she disguise herself as a man and deceive us?
Feng Zhen didn't understand.
The recruitment notice didn't say that talents had to be male. Why did she have to be so careful and come up with an alias?
If she didn't get recruited, that would be fine.
But if she did, her resume would be easily found out to be fake.
Wei Ci said, this woman's name is Mi Yu. Su Chun is her first name.
So what if he was dressed as a man?
She did not say that she was a man.
There was no written rule in this world that said that women had to dress as women and men had to dress as men.
It doesn't matter if the name is fake, as long as the person is real.
Back then, his lord had also used this kind of sophistry to absolve herself from deceiving the world by dressing up as a man.
One could have double standards, but double standards could not be a slap in the face to his lord. When Feng Zhen heard this, he could not help but look at Wei Ci with a complicated expression. You know this woman? Otherwise, how would you know so much?
With the lord, he still had the guts to pay attention to other women.
Was he tired of living?
Without raising his head, Wei Ci said, observing the stars at night and calculating with my fingers, I'll know.
Feng Zhen was speechless. Wei Ci had used this lousy excuse for many years. Even if he was not sick of it, others would be sick of it.
Well, our demigod Wei, what did you find by observing the stars at night and calculating with your fingers?
Wei Ci said, Mi Yu is a woman with a story. It just so happens that my lord needs her. She came at the right time.
There were 3 thresholds for this call to recruit talents. There were 766 people who participated in the first written examination, and this was only the first batch. However, there was not a single woman among these people. There was only one woman, Mi Yu, who was dressed as a man. If Mi Qian had not appeared, Wei Ci had planned to put on a self-directed marketing campaign of buying a horse's bones with 1,000 gold coins.
What story could she have? You'll find out in the future.
Wei Ci's tone softened as he spoke on behalf of Mi Yu. Not to mention anything else, just the fact that she was able to walk up to us is already not easy.
You're right.
Feng Zhan recalled the rules of the call to recruit talents and nodded in agreement. It must have been hard on these scholars.
The interview was the last stage.
The first 2 thresholds were submitting one's resume and written examination. There was nothing much to say in the resume segment. In short, it was to play to their strengths and avoid their weaknesses, boasting in all sorts of ways to let others see their abilities. The second threshold was the written examination. It was not long, and there were only 10 questions. Due to the limited space, there were no complicated and vast collections of classics and history. Moreover, 10 questions would not be able to test the true background of the candidates. Under their lord's suggestion, they changed the exam to 9 practical questions and a semi-proposition, which was a discussion of an essay. The questions were not difficult to understand. Any child who had studied for 2 or 3 years would be able to understand what the questions were about. However, it was not easy to score high. Many scholars who came to participate in the examination came in full of confidence and left with a confused look on their faces. At the same time, they cursed in their hearts. What were they testing on? The style of the examination questions was strange. It was not easy for scholars to cheat. For example, there was a murder case in a county. The victim was a woman, and the perpetrator was her husband. The 2 of them had a pair of children. The children were underage. Usually, it was the woman who did the housework, took care of the children, and served the in-laws. However, the mother-in-law was dissatisfied with the harsh nature of her daughter-in-law, who argued and hit people.
Therefore, she urged her son to kill his wife and remarry. If the examinee was the county magistrate, how would the case be judged? What was the reason? Apart from this, there were also hypothetical questions such as how to deal with the collapse of the embankment in a certain place, how to pacify the civil unrest in a certain place, as well as the situation after the defeat of the Nye family in Zhongzhou. When will the Duke of Lanting send troops to Zhongzhou, and other conjectures about the current situation? There was no fixed answer to such questions. They had to speculate and prove from many aspects and details. It seemed that no matter how they answered, they would be lacking. If it was a simple answer such as, sentence a certain person to death, use a large number of troops to suppress the rebels, recruit corvée to build the embankment, there was no need to look further. Such examinees would definitely be eliminated without any suspense. Only those who passed the written examination, which was physically and mentally tormented, could participate in the final interview. If the scholars even passed the interview, they would be conscripted. This was the first time such a selection system had been used in Nanxing. Many scholars shouted about how bad Jiang Pengji was while they participated in the written examination, which was physically and mentally tormented. In comparison, the difficulty of the interview was not that great. They could also see the big shots. Whether it was the written examination or the interview, Mi Qian's performance was quite outstanding. She might even be able to get into the top 3. As a red in a sea of greenery, her information was presented to Jiang Pengji for her to read and decide. Jiang Pengji looked through it carefully, especially Mi Qian's examination paper. She looked through it repeatedly. Zisher, what do you think? She put aside Mi Qian's examination paper, resume, and the comments of the 2 interviewers during the interview. Feng Zhan said, after discussing with Zixiao, we have decided to recommend her. Chapter 1698. The first question on Me Too's test was written by Feng Zhen. The main idea was how to fix the collapse of a certain riverbank. Some of the candidates' answers were very superficial. When asked how to fix the riverbank, they answered honestly. Some of their answers were very imaginative. Me Too's answers were very detailed and practical. Not only did she describe in detail how to fix the riverbank, but she also mentioned various hypotheses, such as whether the collapse of the riverbank was caused by human factors, if it was, how to deal with it, how to deal with the flood after the riverbank collapsed, how to restore the lives of the people in the county after the flood passed through. She even simulated the cost of disaster relief for each step. She completely put herself in the role of the virtual character in the question. She considered all aspects from the character's point of view. One question was written on 2 pieces of paper, but the dense words made it very enjoyable to read. Feng Zhan and the rest didn't come up with these questions to select candidates who could answer them. They wanted to select people who could govern the various counties. It was obvious that Me Too's answer was correct. Her answer was beautiful. Her style was fundamentally different from other flirtatious people. Other than this question, she answered the other 8 questions well. The best was still the last question. The others only had 5 or 6 answers, and some had 11 or 12. She was the only one who had 23 answers. Having a lot of answers didn't mean that she was weak. On the contrary, her questions were all practical. She was capable and was recommended by both Wei Ci and Feng Zhen. Naturally, Jiang Pengji would add her to the list. If she made any achievements, she could be trained as a key talent in the future. But, since her real name was Me Too, why did she use the fake name of Su Chun? Was it because a woman's identity wasn't as convenient as a man's? Jiang Pengji's interest was piqued. She planned to send someone to investigate and see if there was any inside information. Feng Zhan accepted the order and retreated. He would rest for the night and continue his shift tomorrow afternoon. Such a woman should be quite famous, Jiang Pengji said. But how did Zixiao know her real name? Although he asked with a smile, Wei Ci's desire to live sounded the alarm. My lord, you are asking the obvious. It's because Me Too was your colleague in your previous life. You can only recognize her in this life. Jiang Pengji smiled. Colleague in my previous life? Tell me about it. I feel like she will give me a different surprise. If something had not happened to such an outstanding woman, there was no reason why she did not have a presence in Wei Ci's previous life. Wei Ci said, here. In his previous life, during the early years of the Zhang dynasty, there weren't many female officials, but every single one of them was very good at fighting, and this ability didn't just refer to their martial prowess. For example, Mi Mio was completely powerless, but there weren't many in the royal court who dared to fight her head-on. Moreover, their home ground was not in the imperial court. Under the orders of the emperor, he was responsible for inspecting the salt affairs of the 3 rivers and 6 rivers. He was also responsible for inspecting the corruption and bribery of various officials. In his hand was an imperial sword, and he had the right to act first and report later. Regardless of whether it was salt work or investigating corrupt officials, they were both very offensive jobs. It was one thing to offend people, but it was also easy for her to be plotted against and murdered. The number of people who wanted her life could line up across the entire 3 rivers and 6 rivers. However, Mi Qian's personality was quite unyielding, and she was unmoved by force or persuasion. The number of officials that she had kicked out could easily form 100 mahjong tables in hell. Such a valiant woman naturally had a glorious battle record. Bai Yuexia became the Minister of Works, and before her retirement, she sent her portrait to the Golden Scale Pavilion's Heavenly Craftsman list. Mi Qian, on the other hand, was conferred the title of Marquis and sent her portrait to the Civil Official list. Among the 3 lists of Civil Official, Military General, and Heavenly Craftsman, the Civil Official list was the most difficult and competitive. For her to be able to get a place and not be at the bottom, it showed how good she was at fighting. If Mi Qian hadn't appeared on her own, Wei Ci would have gone to look for her. In the live broadcast room, Salted Fish had already accepted the setting of Wei Ci's rebirth as the female lead, and was listening to the gossip with great interest. Lao Siji Lianming, this Miss Mi Qian is too unyielding. Can't think of a name. I'm crazy cheering for this miss, I can't wait to see her. Dongfeng Express. I'm suddenly very envious. If there were such dynasties in our history, the living conditions of women probably wouldn't be so difficult. Miss Mi Qian could make countless people kneel and call her daddy in the modern world, let alone in ancient times. Burning Snow. Don't be envious of others. Our ancient history also had many strong and handsome women, but very few people promoted them. Ha ha ha, although it's very good, I still think our streamer is the best. Apart from the bullet screen, many Salted Fish also asked Jiang Pengji to pay attention to Wei Ci. After all, the sign of a man's love-shifting was that he developed a strong interest and appreciation for another woman. Actually, the Salted Fish's worries were unnecessary, and Jiang Pengji didn't take it to heart. Then do you know why she appeared in men's clothing? Wei Ci said, My lord, you may not know, but the female officials in the imperial court in your previous life almost all had a common characteristic. Jiang Pengji frowned and asked tentatively, Could it be marriage? Wei Ci nodded. This was indeed a pity. Family had a special meaning for women. Bearing the pressure from the secular world, breaking through the shackles of the family, and walking step by step to a height that countless people couldn't reach, not only required great strength, but also a strong heart. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to hold on long ago. Bai Yuexia married Shi Zhong and divorced in the end. Mi Qian was similar, but she was more decisive. Jiang Pengji said, Continue. Wei Ci said, Mi Qian was from the Ningzhou of Nanxing. She was born into wealth since she was young, and her parents were famous scholars and beauties in Ningzhou. However, they met with an accident when Mi Qian was 7 or 8 years old. They contracted the epidemic and died. Mi Qian was entrusted to other relatives to take care of. But she was an orphan after all. Even if she was born into a good family, she couldn't help but be treated coldly. After Mi Qian reached marriageable age, she married her first husband, who was of a similar age, according to the marriage agreement left by her father. The two also lived in harmony for a period of time, but this husband was weak and had a chronic illness from his mother's womb. He died of illness in less than 2 years because of a cold. Mi Qian was a widow for 2 years, and under the decision of her relatives, she remarried. This person was also Mi Qian's last husband, but their tempers didn't match, and they often quarreled. The first marriage was very happy, but the second marriage was a battlefield where she and her husband tortured each other. Her husband was born into an aristocratic family, but he was an ignorant and incompetent playboy. He ate, drank, whored, and gambled. On the contrary, Mi Qian was a talented woman. Her first husband was also a scholar, and he was extremely respectful to her. The two of them had common topics, and they could talk about anything. They were close friends. What about her second husband? He was useless,
And he still didn't know how to improve. How could Mi Qian take a liking to him? Chapter 1699. Quarrel often? In this era, when a couple quarreled, it was usually the woman who was at a disadvantage. It was fine if she met a well-mannered husband, at most they would scold him verbally, but if she met a scum, she would hit him with her fists when she was angry. Under normal circumstances, an adult man's strength was not comparable to a normal woman's. If they fought, they would really be at a disadvantage. According to Wei Si's description, Mi Chu's second husband was a playboy with no bottom line. Wei Si had a telepathic connection with her, so he said, "Don't worry, my lord." Mi Chu did not suffer much. Mi Chu remarried, and her second husband was secretly happy that he had married a talented woman, which was interesting for a few days. But he was a complete scum, narrow-minded and jealous. How could the two have anything in common? Moreover, of the 1,000 books that Mi Chu brought with her, 70% were left by her parents, and the remaining 30% were left by her ex-husband. Every time he saw these books, the scum husband would feel upset, but Mi Chu liked to stay in the study, addicted to books, unable to extricate herself. In the eyes of the scum husband, this behavior was Mi Chu's expression of missing her ex-husband, which made him jealous. Not only did she miss her ex-husband, but she also kept his belongings? What an unfaithful woman! In less than half a month, the scum husband showed his true colors. His friends even added fuel to the fire, mocking him for marrying a widow, and some said that Mi Chu's ex-husband was white moonlight, and he was worse than shit on the ground. The scum husband became angry. One time, he went crazy and wanted to burn Mi Chu's book collection, and the two of them had a conflict. During the conflict, Mi Chu was punched twice by the other party. Seeing that her husband was still angry, he kept shouting that he was going to beat her to death, which made Mi Yu furious. She called for her servants to tie this husband up and gave him a good beating to sober him up. She whipped him so hard that he started crying, and no one could stop him. After this conflict, the couple, who had not even been married for a month, completely broke up. Jiang Pengji listened with great interest. Such a tough girl was really likable. Mi Chu whipped her husband, and the in-laws didn't object? Wei Si said, this marriage was originally requested by Mi Yu's in-laws. They requested for Mi Yu's hand in marriage on behalf of their son. Naturally, they took a fancy to Mi Yu's ability. They only had one son, and their only son was a good-for-nothing. If the two elders passed away, all the wealth they had accumulated over several generations would be gone. My son was in the wrong first, and they wanted something from Mi Ku, so I'll just turn a blind eye to this matter. The slacker husband wasn't satisfied with Mi Yu, but the in-laws were extremely satisfied. On the second day after Mi Yu married into the family, the two elders handed her the authority to manage the household. She didn't show her timidity either. As soon as she arrived, she cleaned up her husband's family in an orderly manner. However, Mi Can's abilities were not what the two elders were most satisfied with. What they were most satisfied with were the 1,000 books that she had received as a dowry. After all, the books they had collected over the past few generations didn't even amount to 20% of Mi Tu's dowry. If Mi Qian was pregnant, the child she gave birth to would also be able to teach well, and the two elders wouldn't have to worry about this family's decline. Besides, their son was too shameful. He actually dared to make a move against the mistress of the household. He didn't have the slightest bit of self-restraint and was more like a hoodlum. As long as he didn't beat him to death, there was no harm in whipping him to teach him a lesson. The in-laws chose to watch from the sidelines, and Mi Qian controlled all the power in the household. The slacker husband couldn't do anything to her. The husband is unreliable, but the in-laws are still clear-headed. Jiang Pengji didn't agree. How is it clear-headed? It's clearly selfishness. If it was someone else, I'm afraid that person would be tortured to death. My lord's words make sense. The in-laws didn't help their son because they were reasonable, but because they hoped that Mi Qian would carry the household for them. If they were really good people, they wouldn't have spent so much effort and money to get in touch with Mi Qian's relatives, and use them to force Mi Qian to remarry. Didn't they know what kind of person their son was, and whether he was someone they could entrust the rest of their life to? If it wasn't for Mi Qian's own abilities, and her ex-husband's plans for his young wife before he died, who knew how her life would be like now? For an ordinary woman, these days are a little troublesome, but it's not like they can't live on. Why is Mi Qian here?
Wei Si smiled. Didn't my lord say that she's an ordinary woman? Mi Qian wasn't an ordinary woman, and she couldn't tolerate her idiotic husband forever. I don't know Mi Qian's motive for becoming an official in this life, but I know a little in my previous life. Her Majesty entered Nanxing, and it was time for her to use people. Mi Qian's in-laws felt that this was a good opportunity, so they coaxed and pestered her to teach their son more, and they used some connections to get their son a small official position. Mi Qian did as she was told, but her husband was a good-for-nothing, and the more she forced him to learn, the more he refused. In the end, he even insulted Mi Qian, saying, "It's a shame for a husband to be a woman's teacher." In a fit of anger, Mi Qian said, "I'm so stupid, if I become an official, it'll be as easy as taking something out of my pocket." When Mi Qian said that, the slacker husband was unwilling. "What? Is Zhang Pengji your father or your mother? You can become an official just because you say so? Do you think the government office is your family's vegetable market? If you, a woman from the inner house, can become an official, I'll kneel and eat this bamboo scroll." Intelligence limited the slacker husband's imagination. Mi Qian sneered and packed her luggage to participate in the recruitment. She used her ability to show her husband what it meant to take something out of his pocket. Before she left, she even asked the kitchen to study the dishes on the bamboo scroll. She wanted to see the idiot swallow the bamboo scroll with her own eyes. It was because of this reason in my previous life, and it's probably the same in this life. Zhang Pengji was amused. This reason is quite unique. Did she dump her husband in the end? Wei Si said, that person was old and frail, so he was forced to divorce by Mi Qian. In societal terms, Mi Qian had enough of this idiot. When she was young, at least she had a face to look at. If she wanted to die, then so be it. She endured it. She was so brainless now that she was old, and she was an eyesore. If she got rid of her earlier, she would suffer less and live a few more years. Zhang Pengji looked at the screen full of 666 and laughed involuntarily. It would be a blessing to be as innocent as a salted fish. She felt that the reason why Mi Qian divorced her second husband was not just because of family conflicts. If it was because of family conflicts, her slacker husband would have been kicked countless times. In Zhang Pengji's opinion, their divorce was also influenced by the outside world. As the saying goes, blocking someone's money is like killing one's parents. Just look at Han Yu's ex-wife's family, Mrs. Tao, to know how profitable the illicit salt trade was. Not to mention corruption and bribery, which was a magic weapon for many officials to get rich. Cutting off these two paths was as good as cutting off their path to survival. Of course, they would hate Mi Qian. They couldn't wait to use a magnifying glass to find the dirt on her and then pull her down. If they couldn't find the dirt on Mi Qian, then they would find the dirt on her husband. Mi Qian wanted to stabilize her official position and protect her family, so it was a good choice to cut off the relationship with the divorce. Chapter 1700. Madam, you're back. As soon as Mi Yu returned, a young woman wearing a water-green dress walked towards her. The woman had her hair combed into a bun, her eyes were filled with lust and her lips were curved into a smile. A bright and gentle light shone in her eyes. The woman raised her hand to help her remove the heavy things on her shoulders, looking very virtuous. This servant has already ordered someone to prepare hot water. Why don't Madam go and wash up first? Master is waiting in the room. His temper still hasn't calmed down. Mi Yu curled her lips in her mind. I understand. The woman brought a neatly folded set of women's clothing to Mi Yu, helped her wash up, and helped her dress and comb her hair. Not long later, the woman who was originally dressed as a man became a beautiful married woman, but her lips were habitually pressed down. Her eyes were silent, looking a little serious. How did Madam's test go? The woman knelt down and helped Mi Yu tie her belt into a bow, carefully adjusting its position and smoothing out the creases. Not bad, I have some confidence. Right, why is he here too? The woman teased. He's probably worried that Madam will really let him eat the bamboo scroll. Mi Yu replied, Humph, I'm not joking with him. After tidying up the room, Miku went to the main hall. Before she even entered the room, she saw a pale-faced gentleman sitting in the room. If one only looked at his appearance, the man could be considered above average. Unfortunately, he was only an embroidered pillow that looked good but was actually useless. As soon as Mi Yu arrived, the man started to complain. What time is it already? Why aren't you eating yet? Mi Yu ignored him and sat on her mat. The water-green dress woman brought her a table and set up the utensils. The man became even angrier and shouted at the woman in the green dress. You're such an idiot with poor eyesight. I'm the head of this house as a concubine. Why are you so attentive to her? Hurry up and serve her. Don't make me angry. Both of them were blind. All of his concubines were supporting this woman Mi Yu. They must be crazy. Before he married Mi Yu, there were 7 or 8 women serving him in the inner courtyard. The women who once fought for his affections, after Mi Yu married him, all of them seemed to have been drugged, trying their best to please Mi Yu. What happened to the inner courtyard fighting? He was their man, so what was the point of currying favor with Mi Yu? How infuriating! This time, it was even more outrageous. A woman didn't stay in the inner residence and insisted on coming out to compete with a group of men. She did not follow the ways of a woman, so the concubines in the inner courtyard were also crazy. They fought with each other to go out with her and serve her along the way. If these concubines went to serve Mi Chu, who would serve him? The concubine's hand froze. Mika said expressionlessly, "Ignore him." It was just the barking of a mad dog. There was no need to pay it any mind. The concubine smiled and said, "Yes." The man. Whose concubines were these? He resisted the urge to flip the table and suppressed his boiling anger. What are you looking at? Hurry up and bring it over. Do you want to starve me to death? The man was angered by Mi Tong, so he turned around and vented his anger on someone else. Even when the food was served, his anger still hadn't subsided. Time to eat. Saying so, the man saw that Mi Tong had already started eating from the corner of his eyes. He was so angry that he almost had a heart attack. He, as the head of the house, hadn't even said that he could eat yet she dared to eat first? Seeing the man's stupid look, Mi Tong's lips curled into a cold smile. After so many years, his brain was still so stupid. Why did all the concubines in the inner courtyard fawn over her? Did this person not know at all? Naturally, it was because there were more benefits to serving Mi Tong than serving men, and the work was also easier. If it wasn't for benefits, then what was it for? No woman would want to become a concubine. Becoming a concubine to fight for favor was just to obtain a stable life and good conditions from a man. Before Mi Tong married over, these concubines weren't treated very well. The residence was filled with chaos. Many of the concubines would fight over a few dishes, beautiful satin, or even a few caddies of charcoal for the winter. That ignorant look really made people want to laugh. After she married over, she used her methods to make these women see the reality. Men were useless. The one who could truly bring them a better life was not a man, but her, the matriarch. The concubines fought over a man's affections and worked themselves to death. But in the end, the benefits they obtained were not even as good as fawning over Mi Tong, the matriarch. There were also those who were short-sighted and didn't believe it, and ended up being taught a lesson by Mi Tong. As for the children fighting for favor, it was even more ridiculous. If Mi Tong didn't manage it, even if the concubines fought over it with their sons, they would just be an empty shell. What was there to fight over? In fact, they hoped that Mi Tong would get pregnant and have children or have a successful career, so that they could accumulate more wealth so that their children could have a bigger share. After all, the so-called head of the house couldn't be relied on at all. Such a simple logic, yet the man didn't understand. No wonder he was getting less and less liked by the concubines. He really was stupid. With a belly full of anger, nothing he ate tasted good, so he hurriedly ate a few mouthfuls before putting down his chopsticks. When he raised his head, he saw a concubine kneeling beside the table, using her slender hands to peel and cut crab legs for Mi Tong, causing his anger to rise. He said in a strange tone, "Did you really go to the Duke of Lanting's recruitment notice?" Mi Tong replied, "I did." The man sneered, "You weren't chased out by someone?" Mi Tong looked up at him. The look in her eyes told her to understand. Women should just stay in the inner residence to take care of their husbands and children. Don't dream about unrealistic dreams all day long. The man said, "Quite a few people already know about your matter. How do you want my friends to look at me? While you haven't lost too much face yet, quickly return with me, so that you can know your place from now on." Mi Tong sneered. If the men in the house can support the family and are more outstanding than this concubine, why would this concubine need to stand up for them? The man's face instantly turned purple from anger. When did I ever lack food and clothing for you? Do I need you to show your face and make a fool of yourself? Mi Tong said, That's funny. Longjuan's annual expenses alone cost 9,000 strings of coins. The household's womenfolk, maids, servants, and guards are fixed at 5,000 strings of coins. Father-in-law and mother-in-law's expenses are 3,500 strings of coins. And the social interaction during festivals also costs 4,300 strings of coins. However, the income of the estate's farmlands and shops is less than 10,000 strings of coins, leaving such a huge gap. Could it be that Lang Jun has filled in the gaps? Before Mi Tong married, the estate's account books had been read for years, with losses reaching more than 300,000 strings of coins. Now that the losses had turned into profits, and the estate's food and clothing were getting better and better, wasn't it all because of her? You're living off a woman, yet you still don't know how to correct your attitude. You sure are shameless. The man couldn't win against her in an argument, he had no reason to refute, and if he didn't refute, he would feel suffocated. In short, are you going back or not? Mi Tong said calmly, The Duke of Lanting's declaration of war will arrive in a few days. If you leave now, you won't be afraid of being questioned. Declare war? You? The man almost laughed. If the Duke of Lanting declares war on you, I'll kneel and eat this table raw. Mi Tong. Chapter 1701. What's with that look? Receiving Mi Chu's understand look, the man was annoyed. Was she doubting him or looking down on him? If it wasn't for me spoiling you, do you really think you're someone important? This woman actually dared to roll her eyes at him. She sure had guts. If he didn't do something about it, wouldn't she be stepping on his head in the future? Mi Chu sneered coldly and slowly put down her chopsticks. She took the handkerchief from the concubine and elegantly wiped the corner of her mouth. Since you're so confident, just wait for the bamboo scrolls to be cooked on the table. Our family isn't poor. We can still afford a bamboo scroll and a table. If the kitchen doesn't make it to your liking, this concubine will have the kitchen try a few more dishes until you're satisfied. The man almost choked on her words. The finger he pointed at Mi Chu trembled in anger. Mi Chu stood up from the mat and returned to her room without looking back. The concubine hesitated for a second before decisively following the main wife's footsteps. Dr. Mi Chu was the one who provided for her. If she didn't hug this leg, should she hug that unreliable man instead? The man was so angry that he flipped the table and cursed, but the target of his curses had already left. No matter how harsh and nasty his curses were, there were only a few servants in the audience. Not only did he not affect Mi Chu, he even lost his face and hurt his liver. Bitch! I'm so angry. The man slammed the table and gritted his teeth. I'll divorce this bitch sooner or later. I'll divorce her sooner or later. The servants at the side could only roll their eyes inwardly. If a man dared to divorce, he would have done so 800 years ago. Why would this couple torment each other for so many years? He couldn't understand it either. The first madam was both beautiful and talented. There was a wide market for her to remarry after a divorce. Why did she have to hang herself on this crooked tree? It wasn't just them who didn't understand. The concubines in the man's backyard didn't understand either. Mi Chu was probably the main wife of every man's dream. She would serve the in-laws and raise their children. The entire residence would be well organized. There was no need to worry about the inner and outer courtyards. She never cared which concubine her husband slept in at night. If her husband wanted to take a concubine, she would support him. Even the money for the concubines was earned by her. Other than being tall, men didn't need to use their brains. What man wouldn't like such a virtuous wife? The only difference was that not only would this virtuous wife not flatter her husband, but she would also not be dissed by his gorgeous concubines every day. Instead, she could anger her husband so much that even his concubines would stand on her side. Speaking of which, it was very mysterious. Outsiders couldn't see through it at all. In the study, the concubine used the pair of hands that men love to use to massage Mi Yu's shoulders. Her strength was just right, and her technique was also very experienced. Mi Ku was leaning against a table, flipping through a book, his brows furrowed and relaxed from time to time. The concubine couldn't help but advise, "Why doesn't Madam talk to Master?" Mi Chu flipped a page and replied without even lifting her eyelids, "What do I have to discuss with him?" Saying too much would only anger oneself. Anger would harm the liver, and liver harm would shorten one's lifespan.
For the sake of such a man's slow suicide, she was lucky. The concubine said, "Old master always makes madam angry, and madam is also vexed. Why don't you pacify him so that he won't disturb your studies?" Miyu sneered. "Is he even worthy?" The concubine, thinking back to her own master's conduct, fine. He really isn't worthy. There is one thing that this concubine doesn't understand. If madam is willing to answer, why don't you help this concubine? Miyu said. "What is it?" The concubine said, "Madam is talented and beautiful, and you are also young. If you divorce and remarry, you won't have to worry about not being able to find a man of your caliber, so why waste your time on master? Madam treats us well, and we are not ungrateful. We naturally hope that madam can be better. As for master, he isn't all bad, but he can't compare to those young talents. How could other people have so many concubines in their backyards?" Now that she was the wife of a scumbag, she had to put up with an idiot wandering around in front of her every day. Miyu's lips curled up into a faint smile. She said, "To me, no one in this world can be him, so it doesn't matter who I marry." Back then, if it wasn't for her shameless relatives using extreme methods to force her to marry someone else, she planned to be a widow for the rest of her life. Since her current husband couldn't affect her no matter what he did, what difference was there between a divorce and a divorce? After so many years, she had already accepted reality, and didn't want to suffer anymore. If she divorced, there was no guarantee that her so-called maternal relatives wouldn't force her to marry again for benefits. Of course, the current her wouldn't give those people the chance to harm her. The concubine knew very well who the he Miyu was talking about was. Miyu's ex-husband, who was rumored to be a gentleman. Also, there's nothing bad about him taking more concubines. Miyu's words were out of the concubine's expectations. Would there be a wife who liked her husband taking concubines? There are many beautiful things in the world, but they can't compare to beautiful women. Each and every one of them is more beautiful than flowers, beautiful and young. Just by standing there, they are already a painting. Miyu smiled. "You guys always have your own skills. For example, you can always massage the shoulders and back just right. Usually, when you sit and read too much, your neck and shoulders hurt. With just a little massage, how can your days not be beautiful? Yun Yang has a yellow voice, and I like to listen to her singing in the backyard in the early morning. Her mood will be good for the whole day. Xiao Hong can dance in the sky, and her figure is beautiful." Pig trotters liked beautiful and talented concubines. He spent a lot of money to redeem several of them from brothels. Miyu liked them too. Rather than saying that these concubines were men's, it was better to say that they were raised by Miyu. Of course. Miyu seemed to have thought of something, and her voice was filled with self-mockery. In this world, women are the most difficult. If he takes one more concubine, won't he have one more place to stay? There are pros and cons, and fortune and disaster depend on each other. It all depends on what the people involved think. No one knew that when she was young, she hated the existence of concubines the most, and she scoffed at this twisted logic. However, times had changed and the world was different. Nanxing had experienced more than 10 years of war, and there were many women who had suffered misfortune. She had seen too many naked corpses in the wilderness, their corpses covered in maggots, and the scenes of being exposed to the wind and sun. For most people, living was not easy, so they had no right to be picky about how they lived. "Madam, will the Duke of Lanting really order an expedition?" Miyu said with certainty. "Definitely he will. He needs me." The concubine smiled. "If that's the case, the old master. Is he really going to eat the table of bamboo slips?" "Humph. A gentleman never goes back on his word. If he says he'll eat it, then I'll watch him kneel and finish it." Before the expedition document was issued, Jiang Pengji received a few pieces of news. Many people said that they had seen people similar to Hua Yuan. Jiang Pengji connected the dots and discovered a secret. Hua Yuan was heading north in the direction of Ningzhou. Ningzhou? Isn't that Hua Yuan's ancestral home? Chapter 1702. Lord, are you guessing that Hua Yuan has gone to Ning province? Jiang Pengji secretly summoned Wei Ci and told him about Hua Yuan. Jiang Pengji said, "That's what I guessed. If I remember correctly, you said that Hua Yuan died of illness in Ningzhou in his previous life?" "Indeed, but in this life,
I didn't expect Hua Yuan to end up the same way. If it weren't for this encounter in his childhood, Hua Yuan wouldn't have lost his mind, and he wouldn't have lived his life like this. If he was clear-headed, it wouldn't be difficult for him to live to the end of his life, even if he didn't achieve success and recognition. How does my lord intend to deal with him? Should we send someone to capture him or kill him on the spot? Wei Ci felt sorry for Hua Yuan, but he did not sympathize with him. After all, no matter how pitiful Hua Yuan was, his wrongdoings could not be forgiven. Jiang Pengji crossed her arms and supported her chin. She looked up at Wei Ci. I'm going to see him in person to settle this once and for all. Zixiao, do you want to come with me? Even if the personality created by Hua Yuan was fake, she would still feel uncomfortable if she didn't deal with it herself. After fighting the war for 2 to 3 years, she and Zixiao didn't have much time to be alone, so they could take this opportunity to spend some time together. Wei Ci smiled and said, You lied to them at the critical moment. If you don't give a reason, I'm afraid they'll complain again. He was especially worried that Feng Zhan and the rest would misunderstand that his lord was abusing his position for personal gain. Jiang Pengji said nonchalantly, The war in Nanxing has stopped, but there are still civil unrest of varying sizes in various places. It will take some time to completely pacify them. As the lord, how can I sit back and do nothing? In order to ensure the safety of the people, these vermin must be eradicated without delay. Was she someone who abused her position for personal gain? She was clearly doing this for the sake of the general situation and the people. She wanted to deal with the hidden danger of Hua Yuan and bring peace and stability to the people along the way. No matter how many times he heard or watched it, Wei Ci could not help but sigh at his lord's ability to lie through her teeth. No one could compare to her. I'll have to trouble my lord to say these words to Zishi and the rest. I won't overstep my boundaries. Jiang Pengji rested her chin on her hand. Sigh, Zixiao has also learned to be naughty. Who has led him astray? In the past, Zixiao was a considerate person. He wouldn't be so mischievous. Wei Ci blinked his right eye lightly and teased. What does my lord think? Jiang Pengji said, I thought, this is called husband and wife. As time went by, the two of them would become more and more similar in some areas, and more tacit with each other. Wei Ci was so angry that his face turned red. 10 Wei Zixiao's could not compare to 1 Jiang Pengji's level of flirting. The latter's level of flirting had reached the peak. As expected, Feng Zhan and the others rolled their eyes at Jiang Pengji's suggestion. On the surface, he was smiling, but in his heart, he was cursing. What's the point of bringing Zixiao along for work? What's the point? Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows and smiled. I don't mean much. I can't create the young lord that all of you yearn for by myself, can I? Feng Zhan had a meaningful look in his eyes. He raised his hand to remove Jiang Pengji's hand from his shoulder. While pretending to be serious, he suppressed the corners of his mouth and said righteously, My lord is right. Quelling the civil unrest and restoring peace to the people is the top priority. Zixiao is steady and meticulous in his work. With him by my lord's side to assist me, I can be at ease. No matter how big the world was, it was not as big as the young master. When the young lord grew up, he wouldn't have to put up with a lord with a terrible temper. Just thinking about it made him happy. He had rolled his eyes just now, but now he was eager for Jiang Pengji to immediately pack up and abduct Wei Ci. Haha men. Ningzhou wasn't too far from Jiang Pengji's current location, but it wasn't near either. It would take a few days to catch up on horseback. Just as she was about to leave, an unexpected companion interrupted. What are you doing here? Jiang Pengji looked at Lu Zhang with dissatisfaction. Was this guy trying to mess things up on purpose? Lu Zhang said, I heard that the Duke of Lanting is going to look for Hua Yuan. I have some accumulated grievances with him, so I can take this opportunity to settle them. Jiang Pengji was about to refuse, but she didn't expect Wei Ci to plead for Lu Zhang with his eyes. How infuriating. You even have to bring along 2 high-wattage light bulbs. Although she was reluctant, she still brought Lu Zhang and his adopted daughter, Kong Xintong. 2 days before the departure, the first batch of names for the conquest was released. The first one was impressively Mi Chu. Mi Chu, one could tell from her name that she was a woman. In fact, she was indeed a woman. The faces of the scholars who lined up behind her darkened. Even if they were roaring in their hearts that there was something shady and unfair, They still acted reservedly and congratulated each other on the surface. It was a harmonious scene. The documents for the conquest were specially sent to the temporary lodgings of the scholars. When the congratulatory sound of the gong spread from the alley to the manor, Michu was standing in the courtyard and looking at the clouds in the distance. The concubine who was holding an umbrella for her to shade her from the sun asked in confusion, "Why is it so noisy outside?" "I don't think it's noisy. Instead, it's very pleasant," Michu said meaningfully. "Tell the kitchen to prepare it." "Madam, we just had lunch a quarter of an hour ago," Michu said. The bamboo stir-fried table was prepared for the master. The concubine was stunned for a moment before she reacted. She immediately smiled and congratulated Michu. On that day, the one who felt the most despair was probably Michu's husband. When the good news of the conquest came, it was as if he heard the sound of a death knell. The words "my life is over" were circling in his mind. "I won't eat it. I won't eat it even if I die." He would rather kneel to death than eat it. After all, they had been husband and wife for several years. He knew that Michu's personality was the most serious. If she said that she wanted to eat the bamboo stir-fried table, she would definitely stuff it down his throat. "Master, before the madam remembers it, let's escape first, shall we?" the attendant suggested to his master with a bitter expression. After a while, the madam might forget about it. If we stay here any longer, the madam might come. Of the 36 stratagems, escape was the best. The man hurriedly packed his luggage and escaped with his guards. For a long time, he didn't dare to appear in front of Michu. Michu held a plate of bamboo stir-fried fungus in one hand. Looking at the messy room, she sneered without saying a word. He really can't be helped. Let him be. After this incident, he should be able to rest for a while. The concubine watched from the side with cold sweat dripping down her back. Once again, she was impressed by her madam's strength. Anyone with half a brain would know that it was impossible to eat the bamboo stir-fried table. Yet, her master took it seriously. Not only did he take it seriously, he even ran away in fear. The news of Michu being at the top of the list flew out as if it had grown wings. "Letting a madam rank above me is a great humiliation." Who was Michu? A madam in the inner chamber. He had studied hard for more than 20 years. How could he be inferior to a madam? There must be a conspiracy behind this. The 21st-ranked scholar was unhappy. He had a strong and unyielding character. He refused to admit defeat and refused to be conscripted. The onlookers were dumbfounded as they watched the scholar stomp his feet. Then, they watched in bewilderment as the messenger put the document of conscription into his arms and turned to leave. The scholar was speechless. He left just like that? Wasn't he going to ask him to stay? Isn't the Duke of Lanting a woman too? A spectator whispered. It was not like the scholar didn't know that Jiang Pengji was a woman. If he couldn't stand a woman being ranked above him, why did he run to the assessment? Chapter 1703. Sigh, a grown girl can't be kept at home. If she stays, she'll become enemies. I can understand the bitterness of this saying. Lu Zheng looked at his adopted daughter's back as she hurried up and down. He spoke with a tinge of jealousy and sourness. Jiang Pengji glanced at him and said, "You're the teacher's student. How can you use these words so casually?" She made it sound like she was a scumbag who had stolen Lu Zheng's sweet, cotton-padded jacket. Lu Zheng snorted coldly and said, "Ever since she saw you, she hasn't had any appetite. It's as if she's lovesick. Now she's serving you attentively. Her vigor makes people envious. Even her father has been forgotten. Tell me, where did I use the wrong context? I've doted on her for nothing. It's fine that you harmed a noble lady in Langya County, but you won't even let off a junior. Does your family Zixiao know?" Jiang Pengji pouted and said, "He's right here. He's not deaf or blind. Of course he knows." Wei Ci, who was innocently implicated in the flames of war, could only smile awkwardly but politely. The journey to Ning province this time was not far, but it was not close either. Considering that the two scholars Wei Ci and Lu Zheng, as well as the little girl, Kong Xintong, were accompanying them, Jiang Pengji ordered people to prepare a few more carriages. There were more than 1,000 entourage accompanying them. Everything was light. It was true that she was going to see Hua Yuan, But it was also true that she was going to pacify a small area of civil unrest along the way. It was impractical to bring only a few dozen people. Not to mention whether Feng Zhan and the others would agree. Wei Xi alone would be difficult to pass. Not long after they left the city, Jiang Pengji became a little impatient. She invited Lu Zhang and the others to play chess and chat. Wei Xi wouldn't reject Jiang Pengji's suggestion, but Lu Zhang was different. He rejected the invitation. It was impossible to play chess. It would never be possible to play chess. If Jiang Pengji pressed him against the chessboard in front of his adopted daughter, would he still have any dignity as a godfather? His mental preparation was ultimately ruined by his adopted daughter's sparkling eyes. Sigh, daughter, you have the opportunity to be close to your idol, but do you know how your old father will be ravaged? How could he have a chance to turn things around when this couple teamed up to bully him? It was impossible for him to turn over. He could only lie flat on the ground and let himself be rubbed against. Only then could he live. Sigh. Lu Zhang looked at the chess game that he could no longer save. He threw the chess piece back with a thud and said, "Until today, I still can't figure out how such a devoted and loyal person like Zixiao could fall in the hands of a person with the style of a prodigal son." Jiang Pengji smiled. "Do you know what human nature is, Xueqi?" Lu Zhang didn't understand and couldn't help asking with his eyes. "It's human nature to repeat and repeat. You say the same thing every time you see me. Even if you're not sick of it, I'm sick of it. Zixiao is your shitty, not your daughter. You're like an old father whose daughter has been snatched away. As soon as you see your son-in-law, you grab hold of him and repeatedly warn him, grieving over and over again. Sigh, God, please open your eyes and let you only have a son in this life. If you give birth to a daughter, when your daughter marries, wouldn't it be equivalent to digging out your heart? You don't know how sad you would be." Lu Zhang. This cuss was too vicious. Lu Zhang was a little regretful at this moment. Why did he follow her? Jiang Pengji seemed to have taken the wrong medicine. She attacked him accurately every few days, so much so that Lu Zhang began to doubt his life. At the thought of having to face such a lord for the rest of his life, Lu Zhang suddenly felt that his life was gloomy and he couldn't see a trace of light. Wei Xi couldn't help but say a few good words for Lu Zhang. Jiang Pengji wrapped her arms around his neck and laughed softly. Her warm breath hit the sensitive part of his neck. Even if he wasn't embarrassed, it was difficult for him to restrain his physiological reaction. His ears were automatically dyed a translucent blood red, making his skin look even more delicate and fair. He raised his hands to hold Jiang Pengji's armpits to prevent her from sliding down. At this moment, his mood was like the spring breeze in March gently caressing the willow branches. His heart almost melted into water. Who asked Xueqi to be so insensible? It's rare for me to have the opportunity to travel with you, but the father and daughter just had to join us. It's inconvenient for some things. Jiang Pengji gritted her teeth when she thought of this. She stretched her legs and stepped on the hem of Wei Xi's clothes. Her feet without socks looked even whiter against the layers of stone-colored clothes. Wei Xi's eyes darkened slightly when he saw this. He groped around with his right hand, grabbed the scattered socks, and put them back on for her. Jiang Pengji said, "You too. You don't know what's good for you." Even though Jiang Pengji didn't think it was a big deal to run around in a bikini, for the people of this era, a naked arm and a leg were considered private parts. For those scholars who were introverted on the inside, the lethality of having a pair of feet was even greater than being naked. Wei Xi's nose turned red from her teasing. He pursed his lips, put the socks on for her, and tied the straps. "Sit properly." Jiang Pengji curled her lips and moved to sit not far from him. Wei Xi secretly heaved a sigh of relief. In both his previous and previous lives, he had been a restrained and polite person. In his memory, the matter between a man and a woman should happen at night, and the location should be limited to the room. Even if they flirted during the day, they should only be around each other. What about now? There were indeed only the two of them in the carriage, but there were other people outside. Even though Wei Xi had cultivated for 2 lifetimes, his skin was still not thick enough to support him to do things that were out of line. Jiang Pengji looked at Wei Xi's red earlobes and the thin layer of sweat on the tip of his nose. She couldn't help but smile. In all honesty, she really didn't have the intention to be a beast. Didn't he see that she still had the streaming room open? Even if she wanted to do something to Wei Xi, She would first close the streaming room. I heard that men who are introverted on the inside all have a characteristic. After they are introverted, they will be out of control. Why can't this be applied to you? Zhang Pengji shook her head regretfully. She put her feet on Wei Si's thighs. I'm waiting for you to take the initiative. Nonsense. It's really rude to tease a gentleman like this. Wei Si took a deep breath and silently recited the Qingxin mantra in his heart. He lowered his eyelids and continued to flip through the unfinished book. He was obsessed with reading, unable to extricate himself. He stayed away from beauties and became a saint. Zhang Pengji wouldn't give him the chance to do so. She was bored and used her toes to clamp the silk ribbon that hung on his waist. She listened to the jade ornaments clinking against each other. The sound wasn't loud. It was far from the sound of rolling wheels. However, Wei Si's ears could only hear the crisp sound of the jade ornaments clinking against each other. His eyes couldn't help but move from the black and white words to the instep of her feet. He was very impatient. Zhang Pengji supported her chin with one hand on the table. Her body was half lying on the cushion of the carriage. Her eyes slid past Wei Si's fingers. The diamond ring was still on his finger. It was still as shiny as before after years of pulling it out. She smiled and said, Zixiao, do you still remember the day I gave you the diamond ring? Wei Si couldn't help but recall. All kinds of discordant scenes floated past his eyes. Not long after, he was so embarrassed that he blushed. The fire in his heart burned and made him feel uncomfortable. If he couldn't suppress the Qingxin mantra once, he would recite it again. Wei Si didn't dare to look at her. Chapter 1704. Get a new batch? These words played in Wei Si's mind over and over again. His previously calm expression turned into one of embarrassment. Both of them were well aware of what to get. Zhang Pengji could say it openly, but Wei Si, who was a serious person, found it difficult to say it. Nonsense. Wei Si forced himself to calm down and scolded her in an embarrassed voice. It was as if he was afraid that the walls had ears and could hear their private conversation. It's improper to have sex in broad daylight. Be more serious. Don't let others see. After saying that, he raised his hand and put the book aside. With his sharp eyes, he saw that Zhang Pengji had taken off the socks that she had just put on. He grabbed the socks with one hand and grabbed her swaying feet with the other, putting them back on with a serious face. This time it was a dead knot. Let's see how she can get rid of it. Wei Zixiao, you're really hopeless. Zhang Pengji saw that he was still pretending to be a gentleman. She wailed and leaned back. She kicked his thigh with the tip of her foot to vent her anger. Of course, Wei Si was a real porcelain beauty. She did not dare to use too much strength, lest she accidentally cripple him. Rather than saying that she was venting her anger, it was better to say that she was provoking him or scratching an itch through one's boot. The salted fishes could not stand it anymore. Although Zhang Pengji had a sense of propriety and her actions were not excessive in the salted fish dimension, considering Wei Si's identity, the salted fishes could not help but break out in cold sweat for him. Killing someone was just a matter of nodding one's head to the ground. Zhang Pengji's method of torturing Wei Si was to make him suffer a fate worse than death. Tudu Feiqiu, Zixiao is unlucky to meet the streamer. How can a man with high moral standards withstand such provocation? Yi Manqing Mao. This is probably Liu Xiaohui. I feel sorry for Zixiao just by looking at him. Canteen Daffin Auntie. Beauty Ci used his strength to tell everyone that he is a man with integrity. Indeed, he did not move an inch. Everyone was an adult. Some things were tacit. Not to mention that most of the people in the streaming room were experienced drivers. Each one was dirtier than the other. They dared to guarantee with their integrity that these idle fishes were definitely looking for traces of the small tent. Juyuan Buyuan. Staring at the crotch of a cat, not moving at all. Pfft. The ancient gods' attainments in Chinese are indeed beyond our reach. You guys are so dirty that it's scary. The host is so petty and easily jealous. Aren't you afraid that she'll close the live broadcast room out of jealousy? What was a jinx? This was probably a jinx. Just as this salted fish finished speaking, the live stream screen went black. Zhang Pengji used her strength to demonstrate how petty and jealous she was. Those who coveted her were not afraid of being served by the god-slaying sword. After walking for a while, They arrived at a slightly run-down relay station before the sunset. Because of the war, this relay station had been abandoned for almost half a year, but it was still habitable after some cleaning. Jiang Pengji used a clumsy excuse that there was only one room in the post station to let Lu Zhang and Kong Xintong sleep in the carriage, which baffled them. There was only one room in the relay station? Did she come up with such a clumsy excuse with her toes? However, the situation was stronger than he was. Lu Zhang could only swallow 10,000 curses in his heart, not to mention how aggrieved he was. People in ancient times did not have much entertainment. Once the sky turned dark, they would wash up and sleep. The rich could still light a candle and sleep later. Jiang Pengji was not a poor person. Lu Zhang had pledged allegiance to her, so he would not be unable to even light a candle. Thus, he lit a lamp and read for a while. At the same time, he checked on Kong Xintong's learning situation for the day. As a strict godfather, he was very strict with his child's education. After a day's journey, the carriage was also bumpy. Kong Xintong was naturally very tired, but she still forced herself to take the test and prepare for the next day's lessons. After burning 2 oil lamps, Lu Zhang saw that Kong Xintong could not take it anymore, so he sent her back to her carriage to sleep. Lu Zhang was an adult, so he was more energetic than a child. He was not sleepy yet. He wanted to find Wei Ci for a chat, but he realized that Wei Ci was not in his carriage. Lu Zhang. Where did Wei Zixiao go? He asked a few retainers who were on night watch. Some shook their heads and said they did not know, while others said that Wei Ci had just left. Lu Zhang's first reaction was that something had happened to Wei Ci. Then, he thought of another possibility. He looked in the direction of the relay station, and his face was as colorful as an overturned seasoning plate. Wei Ci was really in trouble. His chastity had been lost. After all, he was an adult. It was normal for him to have time to do interesting things. However, Lu Zhang felt awkward when he thought of their relationship. Unmarried, Lu Lanting is still as shameless as ever. She has even led Zixiao astray. That was what he said, but when he thought of the future young lord, he could only pinch his nose and bear with it. When the future young master was able to hold his own, he would immediately kick this unreliable big pig trotter away. Unfortunately, Lu Zhang's plan could not be achieved in a short period of time. In the pitch-black room, one could not see their own fingers. Only the sound of a kitten's panting could be heard. It sounded like there were 2 people. When the moon was in the middle of the sky, the intermittent noises gradually died down. Not long after, a woman's slightly hoarse laughter could be heard. Didn't Zixiao say that he dared not overstep his boundaries? Wei Ci's heated brain cooled down, and his rationality returned. As he recalled the previous scene, the temperature of his cheeks soared. Jiang Pengji said, "You are allowed to overstep your boundaries in this matter. After all, it requires 2 people to cooperate. We can do more research." Since she said that, Wei Ci could not continue pretending to be deaf and mute. What if outsiders know about this? How can outsiders know about the pleasures of the bedroom? If you are worried about this, then so be it. We might as well cut our hair. One will become a monk, and the other will become a bhikkhuni. We'll cut off our 7 emotions and 6 desires. Since we can't cut off our emotions, we'll be content with our lot and be a secular man and woman. Jiang Pengji said, "I feel that I was not restrained just now. I can better understand what the ancestor said about being like a fish in water. How boring is it to be the same? Innovation is the true principle." Jiang Pengji tried hard to turn Wei Ci onto the wrong path of being a beast in human clothing, but Wei Ci had too much integrity. Her efforts were minimal. "You're speaking nonsense." Fine. If you say it's nonsense, then it's nonsense." Her bare arms, which were covered in a thin layer of sweat, nimbly circled around his neck. Jiang Pengji took something out of nowhere and dangled it in front of his eyes. The corners of her lips curled up. She smiled like a man-eating female demon, at least in Wei Ci's eyes. "The night is long and I can't sleep. Zixiao, can you go to Baiyun village?" They fooled around for a long time. It was not until the second half of the night that they fell asleep in each other's arms. The young master that Lu Zhang and the others had been thinking about for a long time was thrown to the ground by Jiang Pengji mercilessly. Tomorrow, they would be burned together and their corpses would be destroyed. It was really so.
Chapter 1705. Are you scared? Jiang Pengji sat by the stream and washed her hands. She wiped the god-slaying sword and its scabbard, washing away the bloodstains on them. When she lowered her head to wash her hands, she noticed that Lu Zheng's adopted daughter was looking at her. Jiang Pengji smiled and waved at her, calling her over. Kong Shintong seemed to have woken up from a dream. She seemed to have thought of something. She walked forward with a blushing face and bowed respectfully. I'm not scared. Kong Shintong nodded heavily to make sure that she was not scared. Jiang Pengji used her slightly wet hand to stroke the top of her head. Her movement was not heavy, but it felt heavy and powerful. Even through the hair, one could feel the gentleness from her palm. Kong Shintong did not dare to move, but the blush on her face deepened. I'm scared. I saw that your face was whiter than the white clouds in the sky. Fear is not a shameful emotion, not to mention that you're still a child. Jiang Pengji let Kong Shintong sit beside her. The little girl sat on one side reservedly, her eyes darting around. Kong Shintong said, I'm really scared, but Master Lanting is here. I'm not afraid of anything. Jiang Pengji looked at the undisguised adoration and joy in her eyes. She could not help but smile. Well, if Xueqi knew, he would be furious. The daughter he raised with so much effort was stolen by me. Jiang Pengji shook off the water on her hands, wiped the water off the god-slaying sword with a handkerchief, and put it back into the scabbard. Kong Shintong said, My adoptive father admires Master Lanting very much. He speaks highly of you in private. Jiang Pengji could not help but laugh. Little girl, Lu Zheng will cry if he hears this. Thinking of the Red Lotus Saint girl that Wei Ci mentioned, Jiang Pengji felt that the little girl in front of her was cuter. There were countless possibilities in life. She hoped that Kong Shintong's path would lead to happiness. Master Lanting, Jiang Pengji responded and gestured for Kong Shintong to continue. Kong Shintong took a deep breath and said with a blushing face, Do I have the talent to learn martial arts? Didn't you learn literature from your adoptive father? I heard him mention that you seem to have a grand ambition to compete with the world's scholars. One can't multitask. No matter how talented you are, you might not be able to achieve your goal if you share some of it with other areas. Kong Shintong said, This servant can sleep 2 hours less every day. Nonsense. You're still growing at such a young age. If you sleep less than 2 hours, you won't be able to grow taller. Kong Shintong lowered her head dejectedly and stared at the wooden clogs on her feet. Why do you want to learn martial arts? Jiang Pengji was more patient with her children, and Kong Shintong was no exception. I'm afraid that even a divine general can't compare to your heroic bearing just now. I'm very pleased. The passionate confession did not have a trace of the muddy color of the adult world. It was pure and passionate. Without waiting for Jiang Pengji to react, salted fish in the streaming room started jeering. Gue Kai Guo Fengxiao. In this live streaming room that sells dog meat, you can watch any of your cute scenes except for the harem fights. Whether it was the gay love between two men, the passion between a man and a woman, or the love between a woman and a woman, there were many kinds of explosive news, and you could choose from them. It's not that I want to criticize you, but can you control your hormones? Don't mess with children. The Lord of Destiny. I don't believe that this is a proper streaming room anymore, and the host is even more so not a proper host. Xiaoshe Wushuang. Spending all my money to buy a new batch of CP shares, even though it's bound to be a loss, I won't regret it. Jiang Pengji laughed and said, Just because of this reason? Even though her goal was Hua Yuan, it was also true that she wanted to eradicate the civil unrest along the way. Nanqing was a vast territory. Jiang Pengji's army had conquered the whole of Nanqing in name, but there were still many places that were uninformed that were occupied by rebels and bandits. The local people were being bullied. She had just defeated a group of more than 1,000 rebels. The rebels were a group of unorganized and undisciplined mobs, so she got rid of them quickly and easily. However, there was not much difference in the number of people on both sides, so a wave of bandits rushed in. Jiang Pengji could only clean them up along the way. Coincidentally, this scene fell into Kong Shintong's eyes. She did not know what the girl was thinking, but she came over to tell her that she wanted to learn martial arts. Kong Shintong blinked, her eyes filled with determination. I also want to wield a knife and a sword. If an accident happens, I will at least be able to protect myself. Her foster father could draw his sword, but she was a burden. She had no other choice but to hide in the carriage.
What she could not accept was not the corpses of the rebels. It was not facing death directly, but facing death without any ability to resist. Jiang Pengji said, "If you want to learn, get your foster father to hire a martial arts master for you." Kong Shintong said, "A martial arts master? It's best if it's a retired martial arts master from the women's battalion. The killing methods they learn are more suitable for women to study." Kong Shintong nodded, but a sense of disappointment flashed in her eyes. Jiang Pengji said, "The methods that the women's battalion soldiers learn are all passed down by me." When Kong Shintong heard this, her eyes lit up again. She smiled and revealed a pair of small dimples. When Lu Zhang heard that Kong Shintong wanted to learn martial arts, he frowned, as if he did not agree. If she wanted to learn something else without learning it well, wouldn't she achieve nothing? It's good that she learns it. It's impossible for her to be alone forever, and she won't always be safe from danger. It's always good to have some life-saving methods. Lu Zhang sighed and tacitly agreed to it. It just so happened that there were women's battalion soldiers accompanying them. They could help Kong Shintong build her foundation. When they arrived in Ningzhou, they killed countless rebels and bandits along the way. Jiang Pengji drank some water to moisten her lips. She sent someone to Hua Yuan's old house and the vicinity of the tribe's land to find out if there were any similar people. Her luck was better. The trip was not in vain. There were indeed people who saw people who looked like Hua Yuan. "Let's go and take a look tomorrow." It was the time when the seasons changed. The weather was getting colder day by day. There was even a light drizzle in the morning. Lu Zhang asked Kong Shintong to wait at the courier station. They went out together, bringing only 4 guards with them to ensure their safety. Jiang Pengji and the rest changed into inconspicuous clothes and went to the residence of the lunatic according to the villagers. Although it was called a residence, it was actually an abandoned, run-down temple. It did not block the wind or the rain. Thinking of the wind last night, the rain this morning, and Hua Yuan's current state, Wei Ci was mentally prepared. After all, he had the experience from his previous life. Jiang Pengji and Lu Zhang were also mentally prepared, but after all, they did not see it with their own eyes. Reality and imagination were different. "It's quiet here." As they walked up the rugged mountain road, they could vaguely see wisps of smoke halfway up the mountain. There was a small village with less than 30 households there. As they walked closer, they could see the shadows of people walking around. Not far from the village was a run-down temple. From afar, Jiang Pengji could hear the children's laughter, as well as the low roars of beasts. The more the beast roared and struggled, the more innocent the children laughed. Chapter 1706. Jia, Jia, let's go. You've ridden enough. Now it's my turn. Why isn't this lunatic walking anymore? I won't give you anything to eat if you don't. Crawl. As they got closer, even Wei Ci and the other commoners could hear the commotion in the dilapidated temple. A few children seemed to be arguing about something. Salted fish in the streaming room had a vague feeling that a storm was brewing. There were fewer bullet screens on the screen, and only 1 or 2 lines occasionally floated by. Jiang Pengji said in a low voice, "Let's go." Lu Zhang vaguely guessed something. His originally brisk footsteps suddenly became heavy, and some hesitation flashed across his face. As they got closer to the dilapidated temple, everyone could see what was happening through the cracked walls of the temple. Jiang Pengji's face suddenly darkened. Among them, only Wei Ci remained calm. Because in his previous life, he saw a completely unfamiliar Hua Yuan at the same place, at a different time, in the same dilapidated temple. When he found Hua Yuan in his previous life, he was completely crazy. The children in the nearby villages teased him and rode him like a beast. If they were happy, they would tease him. If they were unhappy, they would hit him with stones. They played a game of heroes killing ferocious beasts. The children played the heroes, and Hua Yuan was the ferocious beast that they killed. These children were naturally evil. When they were naughty, they would put their urine and feces in broken pottery bowls and tease Hua Yuan to drink or eat. Rotten eggs, dead rats, cockroaches, bedbugs, stones, and even pig and dog feces were the children's tools for pranks. Hua Yuan, who was teased by them, would only laugh foolishly. If he was bullied, he would only whine helplessly like a cub and struggle meaninglessly. Even though Wei Ci had a grudge against Hua Yuan in his previous life, he could not help but soften when he saw this scene. He used to be a person who stirred up a storm, but now he ended up like this. He did not want to lose his mind, and all his evil deeds went against his conscience. He was like a puppet controlled by others all his life, and he had no control over himself. He did not know how the real Hua Yuan would feel when he woke up and saw himself in such a pathetic state. Wei Ci had once softened and tried to take care of Hua Yuan. On the second day, he received news that Hua Yuan had died in front of his deceased parents' graves. Perhaps, death was the true release. He never thought that a similar scene would play out before his eyes for the second time. "What are you doing?" Jiang Pengji strode into the dilapidated temple. The 5 children of different ages were startled. They saw a few nobles in clean clothes standing outside the dilapidated temple. They could tell at a glance that they were not ordinary people. The one in front was very scary. They screamed and wanted to escape. One of them was riding on a beggar with unkempt hair and a dirty face. His legs were short and he couldn't move fast. When he turned over, he was so scared that he fell down. If it were anyone else, they probably wouldn't bother with a few children. Jiang Pengji was different. The child who escaped quickly was caught by the servants. The chubby boy bumped into her and she lifted him up by the collar. Children were the most sensitive. They could sense Jiang Pengji's aura more clearly. That was why Jiang Pengji liked children, but they didn't like her very much. The chubby boy's reaction was even more realistic. He didn't know how to struggle after being caught. He was so scared that he kept crying. 2 streams of tears rolled down his face, and milky white mucus flowed down his dirty nostrils and into his mouth. Lu Zheng's eyelids twitched. He was worried that Jiang Pengji wouldn't control her strength and pinch the children to death. The other children were caught by the servants. One of them was still naked. Judging from his previous actions, he had just peed on the beggar in the dilapidated temple. It was true that Jiang Pengji liked children, but she didn't like the kind that disgusted her. Beat them up and teach them a lesson. If their parents can't teach them well, don't blame others for teaching them. The servants did as they were told, but they controlled their strength. They only beat them until they cried, but they wouldn't hurt their muscles or bones. Their movements alarmed the villagers nearby. One by one, they came over with a hoe, trying to get Jiang Pengji to release the children. Seeing the clothes and the swords hanging on their waists, the villagers were terrified again. Jiang Pengji didn't do anything to the villagers. She just let them take the children back so they could discipline them. If these little bastards were older. Humph. Jiang Pengji snorted. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was full of killing intent. Hua Yuan felt like he had a long and terrible nightmare. The scenes were intermittent. He could see clearly, but he couldn't control his body. He couldn't wake up. That was until a terrifying aura approached him, and the ice-cold touch made him quiver. His muddled mind suddenly became clear. Hua Yuan's face was blank for a moment. After a while, he looked like he was about to cry, or maybe he couldn't cry anymore. Hua Yuan. An unfamiliar female voice came to his ears. Hua Yuan raised his head and looked. He was in a trance. This person. Master Lanting? Even though they had only met once many years ago, Jiang Pengji was a woman with a unique charm. It was hard to forget. Even though they hadn't seen each other for many years, he could still recognize her. Behind Jiang Pengji, Lu Zheng's face was full of disbelief. He didn't expect the dirty ragged beggar in front of him to be Hua Yuan. His right foot seemed to be broken. The wound on his ankle had been soaked in the muddy puddle of the dilapidated temple and was rotting. Jiang Pengji said, "Yes." Hua Yuan looked a little uneasy. He smiled bitterly and said, "I'm sorry to have let you see such an indecent scene." Jiang Pengji asked, "Have you regained your senses?" Hua Yuan sighed and said, "The illness of insanity will only end when one dies. I'm still clear-minded for a moment, but I might go crazy again after a while." He didn't seem surprised by his situation. His cloudy eyes also became clear. There was relief in his eyes, and some of his former elegance could be seen. "You know why I'm here?" Hua Yuan said calmly, "I can guess a little, but I still have some regrets. I hope you can help me." His wish was not excessive. He just wanted to freshen up by the stream, change into a clean set of clothes, and pay his respects in front of his parents' grave. Jiang Pengji asked the servant to give him an extra set of clothes. After washing up, Hua Yuan was no longer in a sorry state, but he looked more than 10 years older than before. His hair was mostly white. Lu Zhang said to Wei Ci in a low voice, "Look at him. He can't even say half a word about the speech he prepared." No matter how much he hated Hua Yuan, he had to admit that Hua Yuan was quite a character. He could stir up trouble not long ago, but now? Wei Ci asked him, "Your heart has softened?" Lu Zhang said, "What's the point of being calculative with a lunatic who's always acting crazy? I don't even have the energy to think about it." "Your heart has softened, but he wants to die." Lu Zhang was stunned. Chapter 1707. Hua Yuan supported himself with a tree branch and limped up the mountain. His crippled leg could only drag on the ground. Because the mountain road was rugged and difficult to walk on, he was so tired that his forehead was sweating and his chapped lips curled up. Lu Zhang glanced at him and couldn't bear to look away. Outsiders felt sorry for him, but Hua Yuan seemed to have lost his sense of pain. There was no expression of pain on his face, but some relief and urgency. The closer he got to his destination, the more urgent his steps became. He even hopped on one leg for the last few steps. No one made a sound, but one of the squires accidentally stepped on something while walking, making a cracking sound. Hearing the movement, Jiang Pengji turned her head and glanced at it. She found that the squire had stepped on a piece of dirty human bone buried in the mud. Hua Yuan wasn't surprised. He turned around and walked over. He squatted down and picked up the bone that the squire had stepped on. His expression was somewhat absent-minded. He sighed and said, "After the disaster of Nanman, everyone felt insecure and uneasy. Our clansmen had to move away to avoid the disaster. Only a few loyal servants stayed behind to take care of the ancestral house and guard the clan's graves to prevent the people nearby from going up the mountain to dig up the graves." He said it calmly, but the others reacted differently. Lu Zhang looked down and Jiang Pengji was expressionless. Lu Zhang secretly observed Jiang Pengji from the corner of his eyes. Jiang Pengji had done this many times. There were many gold raiding officers under her command. When she fought with Xueqi previously, she relied on this method to alleviate the shortage of rations. Because of this, she angered the Nanxing aristocrats in Fan province and other places. The Nanxing family rebelled and was finally wiped out by her. Yu Wu Fengqi. Ha ha ha, Lu Zhang's eyesight is amazing. Lover Zicheng Xiaomei. I really want to stuff the microphone into the streamer's mouth and interview her about her current mood. Ren Konghong. There's no need for an interview. I bet on the streamer's integrity. She must be smiling on the outside but cursing in her heart. Jin Tian Jigging. It seems that the streamer has dug up more graves than Boss Chow. Do you know about gold raiding officers? Jiang Pengji was a model worker among the streamers. She had been in the wind and rain for so many years. She was occasionally delayed, but she was never absent. The salted fishes had practically watched her grow from the age of 12 to the present. They had witnessed her development and growth for more than 10 years, so they knew her inside out. When she gave the order to dig up the graves to replenish the military supplies, many of the salted fish expressed their opposition, but most of them chose to remain silent. It wasn't that the salted fish were cold and heartless, it was just that their rationality told them that Jiang Pengji's behavior was not wrong in the context of her era. As spectators, all they could do was send bullet screens to watch the show. They could not control Jiang Pengji's life. Things had changed with the passage of time. Now that this matter was brought up again, the salted fishes could only laugh and laugh. Hua Yuan didn't seem to notice the awkwardness in the atmosphere. He continued to speak in a hoarse voice. There are a few villages on the mountain and at the foot of the mountain. In the villages, there are often hooligans who don't work in production but do some shady business. They sneak up the mountain to dig robbers' holes and steal the funerary items from the tombs to sell. If that was all, then it was fine. If the dead can be buried with the living, it can be considered as accumulating good karma after death. Unfortunately, most of the villagers are despicable and greedy. Not only do they steal the funerary items on the outside of the coffin, but they also want to take the things inside the coffin. In the end, they even split the coffin and used it to make fire. It's a pity for these poor people. They were famous for a time when they were alive, but they died without a burial place. On this point, Jiang Pengji could be considered to have moral integrity. The gold rating officers did dig up graves and steal money, but they wouldn't go so far as to remove the things worn on the bodies and not even leave a coffin behind. Of course, this was just the pot calling the kettle black. There was no difference in essence. The grave of Hua Yuan's parents was also destroyed. There was a robber's hole that had been filled in nearby. It looked full of potholes. Even though it had been destroyed beyond recognition, one could still see the wealth of the deceased when they were alive. This was not a standard that ordinary people could have. Most of the graves nearby were overgrown with weeds, and some were even used as nests by small animals. Only the grave of Hua Yuan's parents looked rather clean. The weeds around it had been carefully pulled out, and there were no bones scattered outside. There seemed to be no need to guess who had tidied it up. Hua Yuan looked at the grave. He seemed to be in a trance. His eyes were filled with tears. His parents had died of the plague when he was young. His uncle and aunt had taken advantage of his young age and stolen his family's wealth. They had caused him to live in pain from a young age to a young man. If the plague had taken him away, he wouldn't have had to suffer for more than 30 years. Hua Yuan knelt in front of his parents' grave and whispered. Jiang Pengji didn't disturb him. She just watched quietly and treated herself as the background. After about a quarter of an hour, Hua Yuan's eyebrows relaxed. It was as if a burden had been lifted from his heart. His breathing became stable. Hua Yuan bowed to Jiang Pengji and said sincerely, "Thank you, Master Lanting." Jiang Pengji said, "Do you know that when you lost your mind, you called yourself Lu Shi?" Hua Yuan wasn't surprised by her question. Apart from that, he couldn't think of any other reason why a noble would appear before him. "I didn't know about it before. I only found out about it later." Hua Yuan's breathing fluctuated as he talked about it. He seemed to be suppressing his emotions, but his eyes revealed his true feelings. Remorse and pain almost drowned him. Of course, these emotions weren't directed at Jiang Pengji. They were directed at other people, such as the young master he treated like his own, his chief of the Public Security Bureau, and the people who had died directly or indirectly at his hands. He didn't intend for those people to die, but he did cause them to die. Hua Yuan didn't want to explain himself. He only wanted to seek relief through death. "Can I see him?" Jiang Pengji's suggestion was beyond Hua Yuan's expectations. His expression froze in shock. "It's not impossible, but... Master Lanting, you don't know. That thing seems to be especially afraid of you." Hua Yuan could wake up and temporarily regain his sanity because Jiang Pengji's breathing was close. Jiang Pengji said, "Are you saying that you can't make him come out?" Hua Yuan said shamefully, "This isn't something I can control." If he could control the appearance of those annoying personalities, he wouldn't have ended up like this. Jiang Pengji said, "If that's the case, it's a pity." When she first met Hua Yuan, she could tell that there were many personalities in his body. Now that she looked at him again, those messy personalities were gone. What replaced them was a muddy and broken secondary personality. It was like the product of the personalities devouring each other. This secondary personality was probably the so-called Lu Shi. Even if he was awakened, he would still be an irrational monster. "I'm not that crazy to kill my own child in front of my parents' graves. I'll give you a chance. End it yourself." Jiang Pengji's hand, which was on the god-slaying sword, dropped. She threw a dagger to Hua Yuan. Hua Yuan looked at the dagger and smiled. Chapter 1708. Be careful, my lord. The change happened in an instant. Just as Jiang Pengji turned around, Hua Yuan, who had picked up the dagger, suddenly had a ferocious look on his face. He held the dagger in his hand and was about to stab Jiang Pengji in the back. Wei Ci and the rest were a little further away, and could not rush to escort the emperor at this distance. They could only shout out a warning. The idle audience sitting in front of the screen was scared out of their wits. Before they could scream, Jiang Pengji, who was ambushed by Hua Yuan, seemed to have grown a pair of eyes on the back of her head. She unsheathed her god-slaying sword and hit Hua Yuan's wrist with the back of the sword, knocking the dagger out of his hand. Looking at Hua Yuan, who looked like a completely different person, Jiang Pengji said, "You're out." Suppressing the primary personality in an instant, the secondary personality that called itself Lu Shi was really tenacious and scheming. At this moment, Hua Yuan's expression was ferocious. His gaze was fierce, and he let out a beast-like growl from his throat. The retainer reacted and quickly subdued Hua Yuan. How could Hua Yuan, who was almost at the end of his rope, compare to a few strong retainers? Naturally, he was suppressed to the point where he couldn't get up. Give it back. Give it back to me. Hua Yuan, no, Lu Shi, the secondary personality, stared at Zhang Pengji's face with hatred and hatred. Zhang Pengji asked him calmly. Return what to you? Return my body to me. I am Lu Shi. I am the ruler of the world. I am. You are not, I am. He opened his fingers and tried to grab the corner of Zhang Pengji's clothes, but she looked at him with pity. You don't even know who you are. Don't you think that's too sad? How could the other party be willing to listen to what she said? He tried for a long time but still couldn't get close. In the end, he could only roar in pain. The red veins that covered his eyes made him look especially terrifying. Even when he was out of control, he was still quite strong. The squire had no choice but to use extreme measures. One of them pressed down on Hua Yuan's head and forced him to lower his head. You monster! You've taken over my body. You're the monster. His voice carried the hoarseness of a wild beast. Even though he was restrained by several subordinates, he still used all of his strength to resist. Go catch her. She's a monster. Lu Zhang and Wei Ci caught up to them. They were so frightened that their breathing was in disorder. Their faces were still full of shock. Is the Lord all right? Why did Hua Yuan suddenly lose his mind? The scene from before was truly too thrilling. Who could have imagined that Hua Yuan would suddenly launch a sneak attack? If not for the Lord's superb martial arts, she would have been ambushed. Just thinking about that scene, Wei Ci's face was as pale as a wall that had been painted white. Zhang Pengji comforted them with a gentle voice. Don't worry, a mere madman can't hurt me. Don't you know how powerful I am? Not to mention that Zhang Pengji was always on guard. Even if she was defenseless, the opponent would not be able to hurt her at all. Wei Ci secretly glanced at the deranged Hua Yuan and suggested in a low voice. Your Highness, you should hand him over to Ci and Xiaoyin to deal with. He still had a lingering fear from the scene just now. He was really worried that something bad would happen again. Zhang Pengji waved her hand and refused. She would be even more worried if the two of them were to face the crazy Hua Yuan. It doesn't matter. I have something to say to him. I'll be fine after I'm done. Wei Ci and Xiaoyin could not argue with her, so they could only obey her orders and retreat. Before the entourage retreated, he used hemp rope to tie Hua Yuan up. He used a lot of strength and almost lost a lot of weight. Zhang Pengji looked at Hua Yuan, who was unable to break free, and the corners of her lips curled into an unfriendly smile. She used a volume that only the two of them could hear and asked, You said you are Lu Shi? Hua Yuan's second personality stared at Zhang Pengji with a venomous gaze, as if he wanted to use his eyes to kill her. I said you are pitiful. You really are pitiful. You've lived such a painful life that you can't tell the real from the fake. Zhang Pengji did not mind. Instead, she smiled and squatted down to eye level with him. Lu Shi died at the age of 12. The person in front of you who is using the identity of Lu Shi is someone you don't even know. Tell me, are you Lu Shi? Or the me in front of you? This personality, to be precise, should be the Zhang Pengji in Hua Yuan's imagination. The reason why he called himself Lu Shi was that Zhang Pengji's real identity had never been made public. What do you mean? The second personality panted as if he wanted to see through Zhang Pengji's facade. Zhang Pengji said, I mean there is no Lu Shi in this world. If there is no Lu Shi, then who are you? You lied to me. Zhang Pengji sneered. Whether I lied to you or not, shouldn't you know best in your heart? As she spoke, she reached out and touched the space between his eyebrows with 2 fingers. It was a simple action, but it made the other's body tremble uncontrollably. What are you trying to do? He tried to turn his face away from her hand, but he failed repeatedly. Go to sleep. Everything will be over when you wake up. As soon as she finished speaking, the second personality felt a force pulling him out of his body. His limbs and bones were in excruciating pain. Demon, sorcery? After a while, Zhang Pengji's hand clenched into a fist, as if she was holding something in her palm. She exerted a little force and crushed it. The second personality only had time to let out a short and sharp scream before he quickly calmed down. After that, Zhang Pengji's gaze did not leave Hua Yuan. She watched as his eyes turned from cloudy to clear and his rationality returned. When he realized what had happened, Hua Yuan could only smile bitterly. I, Master Lanting, have failed to live up to your good intentions. Zhang Pengji had kindly given him a chance to kill himself to preserve his dignity. She did not expect the second personality to jump out and cause trouble. After all the twists and turns, she still had to do it herself. If there is a next life, open your eyes wide and reincarnate into a good one. She did not like Hua Yuan, but most of her disgust was directed at the second personality who stirred up trouble. Compared to her, the main personality was somewhat innocent. Hua Yuan heaved a sigh of relief. Thank you. As he was about to die, he did not mourn. Instead, he smiled in relief. To him, death was liberation and a new lease of life. As soon as he finished speaking, a dazzling white light flashed before his eyes. His neck felt slightly cold. Before he could even feel the pain, his head had already fallen to the ground. Go and bury his body. Build a new grave next to his parents. If we leave him alone, he will most likely become dinner for the beasts nearby. Zhang Pengji sheathed the god-slaying sword and ordered her entourage, gather a complete corpse for him. When they descended the mountain, Wei Ci saw that his lord was still pursing her lips. He thought she was still angry about Hua Yuan. My lord, you don't seem to be in a good mood. Is it because of Hua Yuan? Zhang Pengji said, half of it is, and the other half is not. According to Wei Ci, Hua Yuan had lost his mind in his previous life. However, the fact that he had split into a Lu Shi in this life made Zhang Pengji somewhat concerned. She had personally come to take a look, thinking that there would be some clues. She did not expect it to be simple schizophrenia. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.